Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my Omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, I woke up to a normal Saturday morning, with the soft shafts of sunlight dancing through the crack in my curtain in the bedroom of my New York City apartment. Thank God it was Saturday, I thought. I was so glad to be relieved of going to work. But I'd woken to a blasting headache and a throbbing hangover. I'd intended to get up bright and early to take Madeira, my Shih Tzu, for a morning walk to the park, but we had both woefully overslept. I glanced briefly at the clock on my side table, which registered 11 o'clock. I couldn't believe it. I'd slept in so late. I suppose it wasn't that inconceivable, nor unexpected, given I'd been out painting the town red the previous night with both of my girlfriends, colleagues from work, whom had inveigled and coaxed me to have just one drink, that was all. I had bashfully agreed with a wavering reluctance, but I said I would only have just one drink. But I have about as much willpower or self-restraint when it comes to refusing another glass of wine, as much as a chocoholic in a chocolate factory has of being told not to touch the chocolates on the moving conveyor belts or platforms, which you know is never going to happen. The temptation is far too great. It's like that for me, if I'm drinking a glass of very good quality wine. That evening, in a very pleasant, vibey, jazzy atmosphere of the illustrious bar, where ebullient people were gathered around tables in congenial garrulous groups, drinking exotic cocktails, craft beers or wine, there was a high-spirit chitter-chatter of people's voices mumbling in the background, which was infectious, as was the general robust, animated ambience of the bar. I think everybody was thrilled with the prospect about the oncoming weekend, which invariably meant no work for 2 days. It would seem for me one reluctant drink had morphed into another, and another, and another, and now I was knocking them back like Coca-Colas. I'm lucky that I can handle my drink more than most. I couldn't believe we had discussed my best friend Grace, who had disappeared over 15 years ago, without a trace. I never liked to talk about her, as it aroused nostalgic, wistful memories of my childhood, that was now contaminated by a deep, cloying, provocative sadness that tugged so hard at my heartstrings, like resounding church bells. But being as intoxicated as I was, I felt somewhat anaesthetized over the paradoxical, vertiginous and inexplicable topic of Grace's mysterious vanishing, 15 years prior, upon which no answers had ever been found. Uncharacteristically for me, I was now heavily engaged in a story about missing people's cases, and instead of being inhibited by my reticent reservations about such a topic, the oyster in me opened up my shell, and I began to talk about Grace Butterfield Smith. You won't believe it, but I had a cousin who disappeared once for 3 whole years. Turns out she'd flown over to Marrakesh, moved in with her Moroccan boyfriend she'd met online. Can you believe it? She only returned home 3 years later, when the relationship with her boyfriend finally crumbled. I gather she was so secretive, both her parents didn't have a clue where in the world she was. She didn't even bother to get in touch with them. Can you believe that? I mean, that's the height of rudeness. Well, the police discovered she'd flown out to Marrakesh at her own will, so they never investigated the case any further. Of course, the family flew to Marrakesh, but they found no sight or sound of their beloved daughter. One day she waltzes back into my aunt's home, as if nothing ever happened. In 3 years she hadn't bothered to contact them, as I was saying, but my aunt never said a word. Can you believe that? She was so glad to have her daughter back. She told my mother that she knew if she upset her daughter, she'd up and leave again, so they didn't want to ruffle any feathers. I think I would be so niffed if my daughter did that to me. Well, I suppose it goes to show that some people disappear on purpose, do they not? Says Caroline, looking at me. You have a story, Carrie, to tell, don't you? I seem to recall you mentioning once that your best friend disappeared 15 long years ago. What happened to her? I frowned. I didn't like talking about Grace, but somehow after a couple of glasses of wine, I'm sufficiently anaesthetised to talk about her. My skin becomes clammy when I remember Grace's brother Richard coming to my door. His olive skin looked whiter than a sheet that day. His beguiling green eyes appeared aggrieved, while the expression he wore on his face was so persecuted. I always remember that. "Kerry," he asks me, "have you seen Grace? I've been looking everywhere for her. The parents are absolutely frantic. You know Grace, she's such a reliable girl. So the fact that she hasn't contacted us is exceedingly bizarre. I was speaking to Adriana, as Grace has spent the evening at her parents' beach house. I gather her cell phone, bag and keys are still at the house. But Grace, she is nowhere to be found." "Well, she wasn't with me, Richard," I explained. "My family went out to celebrate Dad's birthday, so Grace wasn't with me last night. But she did tell me that the 4 of them had pinched 2 bottles of rum and 2 bottles of vodka and were going to drink it on the beach." "Who's they?" Richard asks me. "Lisa, Leonard and Adriana, the 3 of them," I said. "They were staying at Adriana's parents' private beach house. Grace was there too. It was the 4 of them together." "Adriana did inform me about that, but I hasten to say she never mentioned that she'd been drinking alcohol very feliciously. No wonder she was somewhat circumspect, guarded and non-committal when I was speaking to her. I have to say she was acting appallingly vague, very blasé about the whole thing. But I did perceive she looked compunctuously guilty, ruefully sheepish, I might add, almost as if she was hiding something, which means my sister could potentially have been bladdered. You do realise when someone is drunk, especially someone as slight, innocent and petite as my little sister, they're open to being vulnerable, defenceless and impuissant to all kinds of things that can so easily go wrong. Adriana informed me that Grace had said she was coming to visit you. She left the beach early, I gather, in order to get a taxi to go to your house. She said that the 3 of them were picnicking at the far end of the beach, opposite the wooded area, and Grace waved at them and walked away." "That's very strange, Richard. I can see why you're worried. I don't know why Adriana would say such a thing. I distinctly remember telling Grace that I would be at an all-evening party bash at a restaurant venue with some of Dad's friends to celebrate his birthday. She would have known that, surely. She wouldn't have visited me under those circumstances, as I wouldn't have been at home. Besides, it's unlike Grace to leave a celebration early. She loves Adriana's beach house, and if the 4 of them were drinking together on the beach, I cannot envisage her getting up from the picnic and leaving early. It's not something she would do, unless they'd had a blazing row, which is very unlikely to have happened, but it's not impossible, I suppose." Richard looks puzzled. "Perhaps if she was drunk, and I'm assuming that that must be the case, and she was on the way to visit you, she forgot you were not going to be home, which means she left the beach, and she never made it to your house. Something happened on the beach, which meant she never left the beach area, unless some nefarious character gave her a lift, and that is also a distinct possibility. But she didn't take her purse, which means accepting a lift would be exceedingly doubtful, as Grace never goes anywhere without her purse. Unless, of course, in a drunk condition, she didn't give her purse a second thought. But something isn't adding up. I'm going to contact the police. Your friends, even though they're underage, they're going to have to fess up to the fact that they were drinking alcohol. Of course, Grace will be mortified with me for dobbing her in, but I don't care about that. We need to piece the puzzle together. And if she was legless, anything could have happened to her. I agree with you 100%. You are going to have to call the police. There isn't another choice, is there? I just can't believe Grace could go missing like this. She's not irresponsible. It's not like Grace not to be in touch. You know she would phone us to tell us she was all right. But you say her cell phone is not with her either. No, her cell phone is in her purse at Adriana's house. Richard is running his hands now through his dark black curly hair reflectively. Well, she could have fallen down drunk, passed out, or be sleeping behind a bush somewhere, I suppose. Or maybe a good Samaritan picked her up in her inebriated state and left her to sleep off her hangover in their house. Perhaps she's fast asleep right now, even as I speak. We need to establish how drunk Grace actually was when she left her picnic on the beach. It's a possibility, I said, but we can't rule out the prospect that something fortuitous could have happened to her. Like what? Said Richard, looking at me, his face draining of colour. I thought we've covered all the odds here, have we not? I don't want to scare you, Richard, but I need to remind you that there is a pier at Adriana's house. If she was walking, Grace, I mean, along the edge towards the wooden pier that juts over the sea, supposing she lost her balance, she could have fallen into the deep water there, and it's treacherous. If she was drunk, Richard, she could have easily drowned and become disorientated. I remember before Adriana's parents bought that house, the previous owners had a beach party there. They warned about the perils of the pier, as one of the guests got so drunk, and he did fall over and drown. But she wouldn't have done that, surely, asked Richard. Why would she walk to the pier? Would she have not walked straight back to the house? Well, when you're drunk, Richard, you're not exactly stable, are you? Let's face it, Grace is not used to alcohol. So if she overindulged, I'm not quite certain how her little body would have handled it. She could have become very confused and fallen into the water. It's a possibility that we can't overrule. There's another thing to consider as well, reflected Richard. Evil people that take advantage of young women who are half-cut. She could have been abducted. We cannot nullify that possibility. Perhaps I shouldn't have been so unambiguously blunt with Richard by discussing what could potentially have happened to his sister, but we needed to take her disappearance very seriously. Needless to say, it would seem that Grace's image was on every single telegraph pole and tree in town, saying, "Have you seen this woman? Her name is Grace. She's 16 years old. Last seen on private beach. Is expected to have been drunk. She is 110 pounds, 5'5" with long blonde hair, blue eyes, and goldly, lightly tanned skin. She was last seen wearing skinny blue jeans, a pink cashmere sweater with pearly white buttons, and a brand new white pair of Nike trainers in a size 5. If you've seen her or saw any suspicious activity on the date in question, please contact the local police. Grace had been my best friend, so I was mortified by her disappearance and lugubriously sorrowful about her absence from my life. She had been one of the most popular girls at my school. I was a little bit quirky, inexpediently misunderstood, but Grace took me under her wings, and before I knew it, I was the idiosyncratic, unorthodox character accepted among the cool crowd at school, because of Grace. There was not a boy in town who had not taken a shine to Grace. Granted, she was attractive, but she had a warm, engaging personality that meant people were always drawn to her effervescence. At school, she was always getting top grades, so the teachers naturally loved her. So the disappearance of Grace Butterfield Smith was not only enigmatic to the local community, but very upsetting and distressing for many. I knew the 3 young people who had been the last people to see Grace alive. They had been taken into questioning by the police. They dutifully confessed to having been drinking alcohol illegally on a private beach, admitting that they had got seriously drunk. They ruefully disclosed that Grace was very tiddly at the time and had wandered off in an inebriated state, claiming to be going to catch a taxi to visit me. So even the police, after investigating Adriana's private beach and the pier that overlooked some deep water with treacherous currents, they had begun to perceive that in a drunken state she had lost her way and fallen to her death and drowned. For many, that was the most lightly tragic scenario. So on this evening, when I'm having drinks with my work colleagues, I tell them the whole story. They stare at me with wide, fascinated eyes, as they themselves also ponder what could have happened to Grace Butterfield Smith. "So what do you think happened to Grace?" Trixie asks me. "Do you have any theories about it?" "Not really," I say. "I mean, I don't think she's alive, if that's what you're saying. It's possible she could have drowned on that private pier overlooking the deep water." The police ascertain that that is the most likely narrative from all the role play that was performed. It was a tricky piece of beach to navigate. You see, Adriana's parents' house was on a high, hilly elevation. There was a vast sweeping metal staircase that led down over this high rocky incline, but the final step led to a long ribbon of beach sand when you navigated a left-hand turn. If you walked straight ahead to the outer perimeter, it would be across smooth stone paving that covered a rocky outcrop and sprawled out towards a wooden pier that was perfect for fishing. Trixie looks at me through her wide brown eyes. "Yes, but if you're drunk, you can get discombobulated and adrift, can you not? You could potentially lose your way. It would be so easy to fall into that water and drown. I can see it so easily happening. I think the police, as I keep saying, think that that is the most likely occurrence. It seems a bit foolhardy to be drinking alcohol close to a treacherous area of beach, as she could easily have walked over to that pier, even if it was just to throw up. It's almost asking for trouble," Trixie reflects. "I don't know why," she says, "but I'm fascinated by those 411 cases where people just disappear into thin air." "I'm not sure disappearing into thin air is actually plausible," says Caroline. "I think in these cases the most likely thing that ever happened is possibly the most obvious, like in Grace's story. In my opinion, the likelihood is she did drown." "I don't know," I said. At the time, after I had personally cross-examined all three of Grace's friends, and they were my friends as well, I felt as if they knew more than they were telling me. They seemed frightened, but Adriana's father knows the chief of police, so if those kids knew anything, they weren't talking, that's for sure. The police never questioned them further after that. That's all I know, I told them. I reflected over the story of Grace that I'd shared with my work colleagues the previous evening. I'd drunk far too much. It was funny, I thought. I hadn't talked about her for years. It's amazing how a few alcoholic beverages can make you talk like a parrot, as your inhibitions melt like butter on toast and are thrown to the wayside like a discarded piece of luggage. Normally at work I was the evasive private one that was regarded as reserved, rather tight-lipped. But last night I told my work colleagues all about Grace Butterfield Smith and her vanishing one night in a private beach on the Oregon coast. All of a sudden my cell phone is ringing. I reach out to grab it, but I don't discern a caller ID. I answer the phone, hoping that no one is going to be selling me car insurance at this time of the morning. I don't like leaving my cell phone ringing like this. This stranger has rung a couple of dozen times. For a moment I think I'm imagining things. I hear Richard's voice at the end of the phone. This is absurd, I think. It's Grace's brother. Talk about the devil. I'd been talking about him only last night with my work colleagues, and out of the blue he's phoning me like this. For me, coincidences like this have happened to me only a few times. You talk about someone you haven't seen for years, and the next thing is you bump into them on the street the following day. I had not spoken to Richard for over 15 years. It was at this poignant time that both my parents moved to New York. I was devastated by her sabbatical from my life, so much so that my parents believed a brand new start with new friends would help to put the past firmly behind me, but they'd been wrong about that. As for many years, Grace's face had haunted my darkest nightmares. Finally, when I was coming to terms with Grace's absence from my life, Grace's brother is now phoning me again, bringing all those suppressed memories brightly back into focus like an overexposed photograph. "Carrie, is that you?" he says. I'm silent for a brief moment. I draw in a deep breath. My heart begins to pound in my chest. "Yes, it's me." "You remember me? It's Grace's brother speaking, Richard." "Yes, of course I remember you. I'm not likely to forget my best friend's brother, am I? Have you been?" "As well as can be expected under the circumstances. Although I will admit, a day does not go by when I don't think of Grace." "I bet. It can't be easy for you. Things like this never are they? How about your parents? How have they coped over the years?"
Not very well, I'm afraid. I think they blame themselves for not being tough enough on Grace. Dad thinks he should have been stricter on her, a better father, and then his underage daughter might not have got as drunk as a skunk that night by illegally drinking all that alcohol. I think he also believes he should have picked her up that night, after she decided she wanted to leave the beach. He believed if he had always picked up Grace, rather than leave her to find her own way back home, this issue would never have arisen.
You know, Richard, I learnt a long time ago that saying all these if-onlys or what-ifs is so punishing to oneself. I always lamented over not inviting Grace to my dad's birthday bash that night. But you can't go back in time and undo the damage. Our lives aren't like a few dropped stitches in a piece of knitting that we can correct.
More's the pity about that. But very well put, Kerry. I couldn't have put it more eloquently myself. You're probably wondering why I'm phoning you, after this long period of time.
I am, as it happens, but it is good to hear your voice. It's rather like old times, actually.
Old times you'd rather forget, I guess?
Not exactly. I wouldn't put it like that. Because I associate you with Grace, Richard. I don't want all my memories of her to be adulterated by the pain of her disappearance. Let's not forget we have good memories of Grace to cherish and treasure, and that's what we should focus on.
You're right about that, Kerry. As it happens, I have some news on the police investigation in regards to Grace's disappearance. I was informed yesterday morning that a foot has been found wearing a pair of Nike trainers in a size 5. The police believe it belonged to Grace. So it might seem our theory that she drowned may very well be accurate. If it is her foot at least, it'll bring us a measure of closure, and will affirm that she did indeed drown. But I still want answers.
But I don't understand how that could possibly be Kerry's foot, I asked. Don't forget it's been 15 years. Surely if she had drowned in the ocean, her body would have been eaten alive by all those fishes.
Actually, feet are notorious for being discovered, after even a long period of time has gone by. You see, the fish cannot get at the foot in the Nike trainer, so the foot can be preserved, in a manner of speaking, for many years. It's not as uncommon as you might actually think. Anyway, we cannot establish whether it is Grace's foot or not, as the DNA results have not yet come in. But that is not the real reason I'm phoning you, Kerry. I've been, let's just say, marinating. Maybe stewing is a better word to use, I don't know. Over Grace's disappearance over the years. The case has rarely got me thinking. I have lots and lots of questions that remain unanswered. I'm of the profound opinion that someone knows a lot more than what they're saying. Now, you were very good friends with Adriana, were you not, at the time Grace vanished?
Yes, I was, I admitted. I haven't spoken to her in years, after I moved to New York. Why do you ask?
Those 3 16-year-old teenagers that went to the beach that night with Grace to enjoy a booze-up, let's just say, I know they are clandestinely hiding something. They're not telling us the full story. They know what happened to Grace that night. Do you know, when any of those 3 see me, they willfully ignore me. They walk to the opposite side of the street. Now, you wouldn't do that, would you, if you didn't have something to hide? I discern they give me a wide berth at all costs. I don't believe I've spoken to them for 15 long years.
Well, maybe they just feel bad about what actually happened to Grace. If they'd been less bladdered, perhaps then Grace wouldn't have disappeared like that. You see, in some way they possibly feel a degree of culpability. I know I would in the circumstances, if I had allowed my friend to wander off like that, knowing that she's stoned out of her skull, or at least very hammered. I would rue that day that I hadn't insisted that she didn't go off alone like that. I know where you're coming from, Kerry, and normally I would agree with you. But deep down in my gut, I know there is more to the story than meets the eye. Something still does not add up. I'd like to pay for you to come back to our old haunting ground that you used to call home. I'll put you up at a hotel with all expenses paid. I was hoping, Kerry, that you would talk to Adriana on my behalf.
Tell her you know there's more to this story, that you will keep a secret but for a sense of closure, to be able to find some peace. You rarely would like to know what really happened to Grace. I mean, they're much more likely to open up to you than to me. You are their close friend. I mean, if I was to start asking questions, they would invariably clam up. I don't know how I can do that. Speak to Adriana about this case, I mean. I'm not sure how to go about it, actually. I've been giving the conundrum a lot of thought. I was thinking you can act like you're coming back to your hometown after having been away for 15 years. You want to reconnect with some old friends again. You invite Adriana and the other two on different occasions for a fancy dinner at the hotel. You generously plough her with a lot of expensive French champagne that she simply can't resist. If she drinks enough, if her inhibitions are no longer suppressed or subdued, she might just spill some sententious revelatory information that I would be grateful to hear about. I thought about how on Friday night I'd opened up to my work colleagues about Grace, only because I'd drunk so much alcohol. It was indeed a useful tool in getting people to talk, but even so there were no guarantees it would actually work. If it was true that the last 3 people to see Grace alive had not uttered anything about the case in 15 years, how could I even begin to hope that they would start to talk now? All right, Richard, I tell him, I'll do it. But what if they really don't have any answers? Or what if they refuse to talk? What then? In that case, at least I will feel that I left no stone unturned, that we questioned all the people thoroughly, who were the last people to see her alive. I will feel significantly better knowing that I've exhausted every avenue of investigation. I do not feel the police did a good enough job in the circumstances. And sometimes in life, if you want something doing well, you need to do it yourself. So when would you like me to go, Richard? I asked. As soon as is convenient for you. Well, I'll leave in the morning in that case. Great. I'll book your flight right now and send you the details, including the hotel. I thought of booking you into the Ocean Lodge Hotel, close to Cannon Beach. Is that all right? That's great, I said. I love Cannon Beach. Fine. Well, I'll send you all the details. Goodbye, Richard. Goodbye, Kerry. Once again, thanks for doing this for me. It's a pleasure, I say. Cannon Beach is a small coastal city where I grew up as a young girl. It's highly revered for its glorious views. Standing tall in the ocean is the quintessential landmark Haystack Rock, which is a seasonal home for tuft puffins. It was not long before word spread around our local neighbourhood that I was back home, and it turned out I didn't even have to phone up Adriana, as when I was looking around one of the rather eclectic boutiques close to the hotel, who should I bump into but Adriana herself? And the good news was that she seemed so pleased to see me. Carrie! Is that really you? I don't believe it! I haven't seen you in years! Where on earth have you been? She says, giving me an effusive warm hug. Well, I have an apartment in Battery Park in New York, along the Hudson River, which is close enough to the hustle and bustle of the city, I suppose. Lovely! But it seems a world away from life in a beach town like Cannon Beach, does it not? Oh, believe me, it is. I do miss it around here, though. Lots of wistful, evocative, nostalgic memories, I have to say. It's been a long time, far too long. But it is good to see you, Adriana. Listen, I'd love to catch up with you. Would you do me the honour of joining me for dinner tonight at the hotel? My treat, of course. Oh, that's so kind of you. I'd love to, says Adriana. You know, you haven't changed one bit from when you were 16 years old. I can't believe it. We're both 31 now. Doesn't time absolutely fly? Tell me about it. It's really scary, I said, rolling my eyes. I mean, I was 16 when I was here. Now I'm 31. I actually feel prehistoric. I couldn't believe that Adriana had bitten the bait. She was genuinely thrilled to see me. And actually, likewise, I was pleased to see her too. So the feeling was mutual. But the question was, would she talk? And more to the point, did she know anything about what really happened to Grace that fateful day over 15 years ago? I had informed Richard via text that Adriana was joining me for dinner. He was over the moon that things were moving fast. Look, I'd assured him, just because she's agreed to have dinner with me doesn't guarantee that she'll actually talk. So don't be premature in your enthusiasm. He had responded, I have faith in you, Carrie. If anyone could get her to talk, it will be you. When Adriana met me in the hotel lobby, she looked very sophisticated, exceedingly elegant in her black evening gown, with its shoestring straps and her stiletto high heels. She came from an affluent, well-to-do, wealthy family, so she looked every part the quintessential rich girl, with her hazelnut bobbed hair highlighted stupendously in different blonde and red shades. For me personally, seeing her looking so grown up made the butterflies start flapping in my stomach. Oh, you look so gorgeous, says Adriana, giving me a huge hug. As skinny as ever. You make me so sick. And I love that red dress you're wearing. It's so chic. I expect you bought it in Fifth Avenue at Macy's, didn't you? Actually, I did, I chuckle. I must admit, you look incredible too. Thanks, she says. That's kind of you to say. It really helps to rely on Daddy's wallet, she says. I think I'm going to have to find a rich man to marry. You see, I'm high maintenance. As Dolly Parton says, you can't believe how much money it costs to look so cheap, she jokes. Well, cheap you don't look, I say. I felt guilty about what I had in mind to do, as I genuinely liked Adriana, so I could feel the nausea rising up in the back of my throat, because I did feel somewhat treacherous. Ostensibly on this evening my hunger had been eclipsed by the angst that was charging through my mind like a rhino in the thicket. At first, when I insisted on ordering French champagne for the both of us, my heart sank when Adriana declined and seemed hesitantly reluctant. I'm not sure, she said, looking timorous. I don't know whether drinking champagne is actually a good idea for me. It tends to go straight to my head. Over the last few years, I've had real issues with drinking too much, you know. I had no idea. But if it makes you feel better, you can stay over in my bedroom to sleep off a hangover. I've got an extra bed in my hotel room. Or if you prefer, I'll put you in an Uber myself. Oh, all right. Why not, if you insist? After all, I haven't seen you for such ages. So we should celebrate. And French champagne it is, then. Adriana visibly relaxed. Once the French champagne arrived, it seemed there was no stopping her. Her inhibitions soared in the sky like an eagle on the wind. She was worse than me when it came to drinking alcohol. But unlike me, who I think can manage to maintain a measure of sobriety, with Adriana her tongue became increasingly loose, like one of the garrulous fishmongers' wives at the market, who never stopped chatting away. We both ordered a dozen oysters for starters, which were so fresh they melted in the mouth, served with fresh lemons, plenty of ground black pepper and Tabasco sauce. We both sucked them hungrily out of their shells, swallowing them whole with a fervent appreciation, as they tasted exactly like the ocean. Then we ordered fresh kingklip, served with mashed potatoes, mixed vegetables, creamed spinach, and lemon and dill sauce, as well as chips. And it was delicious. Adriana was knocking the champagne back hard, and I surreptitiously ordered another bottle and clandestinely kept filling up her glass, and she became blindly oblivious to how much champagne she was drinking, and began to giggle. The formal restraint seemed to have been pulled right back from her somewhat reserved demeanour, and then it was as if a wild, frisky, untamed wild horse plundered the conversation with a fervent ebullience, as if she had abandoned her inhibitions to the wayside. I had pretended to be drinking, but had taken tiny sips of my champagne, which was very difficult for me, because if I needed to get to the bottom of this enigmatic mystery, I required my attention to be razor-sharp. It was imperative that I treaded cautiously. "It's been so long, hasn't it?" said Adriana, beginning to chuckle. "The last time I saw you, when was that? I'm just trying to think." "I think it was Grace's memorial service, because they couldn't do a funeral, could they, in the circumstances," I said. "It was such a fabulous occasion honouring Grace's life, with so much pomp and ceremony. I loved the carriage and the horses they hired, and all the white pigeons and hot air balloons they released into the air. Do you remember?" Adriana's face became reflective. "So sad, Grace dying like that, isn't it? What a waste." "Still," she shrugged, "what can you do? Things like that happen. Life's not always predictable. My dad says that when it's your time, it's your time. He believes if you die of cancer, your time's up. If you recovered from cancer, you were meant to recover. He doesn't believe the recovery was just by chance. He believes everything is written in the stars before we were born. It is what it is. I actually like his thinking. It means, well, we cannot change the outcome of anything. We cannot blame ourselves when something bad happens because it was always meant to be. My heart was thundering in my chest. Well, I wouldn't like to think we had no power to change outcomes, I said. But you seem so sure Grace is dead. Do you know something I don't? It was in that moment there was a look in Adriana's face that I will never forget. I wish I could describe that expression to you, but it was almost as if the windows of her eyes had drawn back their curtains, and in their unveiling, I definitely saw that Grace was dead. And Adriana knew a lot more than she was saying. Please, Adriana, you can trust me. I've always known you knew what really happened to Grace. You have my solemn word I won't tell anyone what happened to her, but please will you tell me how she died? All right, I'll tell you. But I promise you, Kerry, if you go to the police, I'll deny absolutely everything. Do you understand that? Of course, I said. Adriana's story. As you know, I invited Kerry to join the three of us on an alcoholic binge on my parents' private beach, as I'd pinched 4 large bottles of alcohol from my parents' bar. But it was 2 bottles of rum, 2 bottles of vodka. I recall you told us you were unable to come. I think you were celebrating your father's birthday bash. Grace was very disappointed. She so desperately wanted you to join us. Grace, Leonard and Lisa left Cannon Beach and took the trip to my parents' beach house, arriving at my home at about 5 p.m. that afternoon. My parents were away for the weekend, so we had the beach house to ourselves, which was absolutely thrilling. We decided to order pizza and take some Cokes and some lime and lemonade to have with the vodkas, rum to have with the Cokes in the coolers. We wanted to get seriously drunk that night, as my parents weren't around to spoil all the fun. After all, when the cat's away, the mice do play. We all took the cooler boxes and the recently delivered piping hot pizzas down to the beach. As you know, our house is situated on a high hilly elevation, so you have to warily negotiate your way down a sweeping metal staircase that can be precariously difficult, especially if it's very windy. If you take a turn to the left, you're walking across a vast ribbon of beach. We walked to the end of the beach, where it's strewn with rocks and a plethora of Douglas firs, Oregon maples, cypress and hawthorn trees. It was already dark that evening. It was low tide, I think, possibly about 7 o'clock at night, I can't be sure. We were wearing our headlamps, of course. It was so lovely sitting on the beach. We watched the waves crashing gently to the shore, injecting a fine undulating spray of white lacy foam over the sand, then retreating back again in its repetitive backwards and forwards motion. We sat there so contentedly on our beach towels, listening to the soothing sounds of the water intermingled with the chorus of crickets and frogs. We could see the ocean shimmering beautifully under the ethereal light of a pearly luminescent moon that dappled the water with a faint silvery sheen, and the dusky sky was almost marbled with light greys, while the stars just twinkled like rhinestone jewels on a velvety black evening gown. You could see the silhouettes of the tall vertical trees jiggling in a slightly cool breeze. We spread out our picnic blanket and began to eat the margarita pizza slices we'd ordered from the pizzerias and pour out our drinks in proper glass tumblers, not just plastic things. Let's just say we were beginning to get a little tiddly. We were all giggling a lot. I remember Grace kept saying that she wished you were here, as it was such a magnificent night. It really was, and we were having so much fun. Then something strange happened. Everything became hauntingly, airily quiet. The sounds of the crickets and frogs just dissipated, and even the large crabs we'd seen running up and down the beach had simply vanished, disappearing from sight, which was most unusual behaviour, as I've never seen the crabs do that before. It was as if they too had sensed that something was seriously off. It was like the pleasant, congenial ambience of the beach
had just suddenly shifted and changed, and had been overtaken by a menacing oppression that left chills darting down my spine. I must admit, even though I'd only had a little to drink, I wasn't so sloshed that I couldn't sense something was really wrong. It really felt as if something was watching us from the trees. It was Grace who became very anxious. She swore she had seen some red eye shine staring at us 8 feet off the ground, hiding behind a tall Douglas fir tree. She became affrighted, discomposed, very distressed. She said, "I want to go. I'm leaving now. There's something there leering at us. It's got red eyes." We all became alarmed and asked Grace where she'd seen these red eyes. She pointed to a specific spot in the trees. We followed her gaze and direction, and then we saw the eyes too. I think every single cell in my body was tingling with trepidation and abject horror. To see these menacing, menacious red eyes staring at us that appeared as large as bright red tennis balls, the colour of traffic lights, which only got 1,000 times worse when we heard the most dreadful low guttural growling sound, which left us in no doubt that we were in the presence of a very vicious predator. Grace jumped up from her seated position on the sea sand and began to run so swiftly. I think that was her greatest undoing, as running from a predator is asking for trouble. They love to chase. We suddenly heard this rustling sound, very heavy, powerful feet padding the ground, and then this black monster shot out of the trees, gliding swiftly past us towards Grace. It grabbed her. She began to scream. The 3 of us sitting on the beach were too shocked. We could see the creature clearly. It stood at about 7 feet tall. It had the face of a man, but the muzzle of a dog, as well as the ears and the teeth of a savage wolf. The creature was clearly bipedal, with a broad chest like a man, with arms and hands and feet like a man, but with the claws of a dog. It also possessed a very full, long tail. It was covered with long, flowing black hair that is so incredibly dark it's almost navy blue. It gleams in the moonlight that caresses its features so well that I can see the details of its pink gums and the creature's white canine teeth. The creature roars. The sound just drills through us like a jackhammer. Grace is screaming. She's fallen back onto the sea sand. The creature is standing over her on 4 feet, like a lion does over its prey, clamming its jaws viciously over her throat, tearing into her neck. When it looks up at us, its muzzle is dappled by her blood. Grace is lying there limply on the beach. The only good thing I can say about this is she didn't suffer. It was so quick. The creature ignores us, throws Grace over his shoulders, gliding away into the trees. We had no idea what we'd seen, but we leave all our picnic stuff behind us. We run as fast as we can, dashing back to the beach house, bolting all the doors and windows behind us. We are all shaking. We are so anxious we don't know what to say or do. But when we calm down, we call my parents, who swiftly return to the beach house as fast as they can. When we tell them exactly what's happened, they tell us not to breathe a word about this to anyone, as no one would ever believe the credibility of our story, as it sounds far too far-fetched to be true. As I listen to Adriana's compelling story, I know she's not making the story up. You absolutely know when someone is telling a fictitious story. But the way she's telling me this, I believe every single word of it. Now I can comprehend why the 3 of them were so guarded in telling such an unlikely, preposterous story. It is not a story I would eagerly share with the police myself. I was very grateful that she shared the story with me and trusted me enough to do so, and was even more surprised that I actually believed her. "I don't understand. You believe me? Dad said if I ever told anyone our story, they'd never believe a word of it." "But did your dad believe your story?" "Absolutely. He knows I'd never lie to him." "There you are. Your dad, who is a cynical person, unlikely to believe a spurious story, believes your account. But I do understand why he advised you against telling the police." "We just told the police that Grace wanted to leave early, that she went ahead of us, and she did in a way. We told them the whole truth, only eliminating the strange animal we encountered. My dad said it might have been a Bigfoot or a dogman. We're not sure what it was, but it was the scariest thing I've ever seen, Kerry." I thanked Adriana for telling me this story,
I was so glad to know how Grace met her end. But I didn't think the story was appropriate to share with Richard, for knowing his sister had been filled with such abject terror before she died was not something I was compelled to share with him. In the end, I told him that Adriana was certain that because his sister was so drunk, she had fallen over the pier and drowned, and that they were in no doubt that this had happened, as they thought they'd seen her standing there on the pier. I thought that way he would believe she was so drunk that she died without suffering at all. I didn't have the heart to tell him the grisly truth. For me personally, it was hard to stomach how Grace had actually died, but at least it offered me a measure of closure. We were to discover that the foot recovered in the ocean did not belong to Grace after all, so the location of her bones still remains a mystery. So there you are. That's my story.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, I'm sitting here in a Seattle coffee shop. I come here all the time. I choose the table furthest away from all the other tables, at the far end of the coffee shop, close to the window, so that I can become as obscure and nebulously indistinguishable as possible, surreptitiously disappearing and blending into the background. I don't want to be noticed. I've always wondered what it would be like to walk around invisible all the time, to have the ability to cloak myself, rather like a chameleon on a tree branch, or like a stonefish in the bottom of the ocean, just blending into the scenery so seamlessly that no one perceives me at all. I was never desperately shy or self-effacing, quite the reverse, actually. It's just I always think that when people look at me, they can see the terrible thing that I've done, that has completely ruined the lives of both of my parents and my brother Dylan. And the worst thing of all is that everything that transpired that infelicious, objectionable night that I so wish I could take back, like a garment you bought from a shop that you wish to exchange. Indeed, nothing will ever be the same for my family again. But like everything in life, one has to learn to adapt to change. It's not easy by any manner of means. In truth, it's like I'm wearing this tragedy all over my face, like an indelible tattoo, or a painted canvas that says, "Hello, I'm Kathy Asher, and by the way, in case you don't know, for the record, I killed my identical twin sister." I don't know why, but I feel as naked, pellucid and translucent as a glass pane, as if everyone can see right through me and perceive exactly what I did. It's as if there is no crawl space that I can find small enough to hide in. I prefer to gingerly shrink back in the shadows, silently disappearing from sight. I don't want anyone to see me or even acknowledge or recognize me, for the shame and self-recrimination I feel is illimitable. It is also dreadful for my parents, for they only have to take one look at me, and they're ruefully reminded of the fortuitous tragedy, for in my face, every time they look at me, they see my sister. They tell me that looking at me has kept part of my sister alive, but I know they are clandestinely tormented. It's equally as appalling for me, as imagine if you see the very person you killed staring back at you in the mirror every time you look. How would that make you feel? It's like not a moment in your life can pass by without your being reproachably reminded of the tragedy. I always avoid mirrors wherever possible, and I've even covered the mirrors up in my own apartment with towels, as I want to bypass her face at every cost. If I look at my own reflection, she's staring back at me, reminding me of my reckless lunacy on that inauspicious, bodeful night that hangs around my life like a thick, oppressive, tenebrous curtain that deletes all the light. The memory of my sister Susan profoundly haunts me during the daylight hours, clinging to me like the sticky silken threads of a spider web that cannot be brushed away. Her face assiduously taunts me in my nightmares. It's like wherever I go, her dogged image is chasing after me, like a tenacious stalker, indeterminably unwavering in his persistent application to hover over me day and night. I will never be able to forgive myself for what I have done. The guilt is all-consuming, with a tsunami of sorrowful grief and remorseful regret. There was a time when I was ebullient, enthusiastic and passionate. Even when I was a schoolgirl, I was as sharp as a raven, as enthusiastic as a golden retriever puppy, inquisitive and curious about the world, always happy and carefree.
For indeed, if I had had a tail, I would have been wagging it every moment of the day.
In those days I was happy to sit in the front seat in the classroom, throwing up my hand enthusiastically to answer all the teacher's questions. I was sanguine and consummate in auditioning for leading parts in theatrical productions. But now I have withered away, like a wild flower in the valley. My equanimous confidence has shrunk away, like a woolly jersey thrown into a hot wash that is recovered, inconspicuous and small, only fit for a doll to wear. My once buoyant self-esteem is pretty much the size of a frozen pea from the bag in your freezer cabinet. I have withdrawn from my life, like a tortoise retreating into its shell. Of course, there was a court case. The judge and jury found me not guilty. But only the three of us in the car really know what happened that night. And that haunting evening relentlessly plays back in my mind, over and over again, like a video recorder being pertinaciously recycled and replayed again and again and again. Sometimes I want to gather that roll of film in my mind, tear it up into thousands of pieces. How I wish I could turn back the hands of time. I wonder how many people have had an event in their life that they so wish they could change the outcome, with the benefit of hindsight in mind. Almost everyone, I should think. For we're not immune to the fragility of being human, are we? The mistakes we're inclined to make, unlike a piece of sewing, there is just no going back and undoing those stitches. There is no rehearsing for the part over again. For the days have passed. They have written their scripts on the fabric of time, with a permanence that cannot be erased or washed away, like the scat on your roof. I have so much regret in my heart that I insisted on driving us to that larny, grandiose party that we'd been invited to, that turned an ill-fated, pretentious night into a living hell, when my whole world came crashing down before me, like a pack of dominoes. I was so excited about going to this social engagement. It had looked so promising. I was the one so expeditiously impractical, imprudently enthusiastic, failing to engage in a little bit of common sense, for I was driven by a capricious, perfunctory desire to have a plethora of fun, with little consideration for the harrowing risks it espoused. My sister Susan, she was so much more reliable, the steadfastly, prudently sagacious one that considered things sensibly, and never injudiciously dived into the deep end like I always did. My sister and my brother Dylan both put their feet down, insisting we do not go to this party. But the petulant, spoilt brat within me keeps stamping her foot indignantly and lamenting. Normally my sister Susan and I were like two peas in a pod, agreeable on everything, except on this occasion, of course. And we were close in the way twins have that extra special relationship that others fail to comprehend. "Why do the two of you have to be such wet blankets?" I ask. "Why can't we go to the party? Come on, it'll be so much fun."
"Kathy, I don't have a good feeling about us going out in this weather. Look, it's raining cats and dogs out there. The weather reports say the roads are hazardous. Let's have a cosy night in. Watch television. Mum and Dad have retired to bed. We've got the place to ourselves. I'm sure Susan will cook us up some popcorn and make chocolate milkshakes for us. The roads out there are very slippery. It's not wise to drive in conditions that should be avoided."
"Oh, come on, you two. Stop being such spoil sports. It's not that far to the party, you know. Have you not seen that programme on television? What do they call it? Ice road truckers. These people have so much guts. They drive these massive, gargantuan trucks in the most dangerous, venturesome conditions with a fearless effrontery. We're talking about slippery, icy, arctic, cold conditions that are so perniciously lethal. One critical wrong move, they could easily lose their lives in a heartbeat. These people have a plucky fortitude, nerves of steel."
"Oh, so what you are saying, sis, is that we're both wimps, as we don't want to come to a party with you, as the weather is malignantly bad."
"Well, if the two of you aren't going to come with me, then I'm going on my own. Unlike you, I'm not afraid of driving in a bit of rain. I've got a gritty spunk. Besides, to an ice road trucker, minding the roads out there with a car like mine would be a walk in the park to them. They'd think we were pathetically silly to be intimidated by a bit of rain."
I reach out and grab my purse and my car keys. I pull out an umbrella from the holder in the entrance hall. I'm dressed for a party in my elegant silver dress with my silver high heels. I look $1,000,000. I'd spent hours curling my long dark hair with curling tongs, painting my nails a silver glittery colour. I'll be damned if I'm not going to this party. I walk to the front door, throw on my raincoat that is hanging on the hook in the hallway. I surreptitiously open the front door. It creaks open. The rain is thundering down. It's almost a liability for me to run from the front door to the garage, but I refuse to be intimidated. I brazenly rush out into the rain with my umbrella lifted above my head. I'm almost slipping on my silver stilettos as I pull open the garage door. Damn this weather, I think. I press my remote control. It opens the car door with a click. I sink back onto the leather seats gratefully. I feel fired up with umbrage and indignation. I don't want to be stuck out on a Saturday night at home with my 2 siblings watching something so boring on television, when we could be having so much fun at a party with the music blaring loudly, the bright colourful disco lights flashing, not to mention the alcoholic cocktails on offer and amazing piping hot snacks served on generous silver platters by waiters dressed in black and white ensemble, all in a gargantuan grandiose marquee. If my siblings aren't going to come with me, I think, stuff them. I'll go alone. I'm going to have fun tonight. I turn the key in the engine. I'm about to press down the accelerator with my foot. Then I see 2 figures waving me down. It's Susan and Dylan. Susan is knocking on my window. Her face is discomposed and alarmed. I roll down my window and scowl. "What is it, sis? Are you going to stop me from going to the party? Because you can't. I'm going, and that's that." "No, we're coming with you. I don't want you to be driving on your own to this party." Before I can say Jack Robinson, my sister is sitting next to me in the front seat of the car, and Dylan is seated in the back. I press down the accelerator firmly, whizzing down the driveway, the rain assaulting my windscreen so hard that even my windscreen wipers are battling and struggling to cope with the onslaught. The rain is unrelenting. I'm struggling to see clearly with the mist gathering on my windscreen, and all the water is just bucketing down. For a brief second, I'm almost defeated, rather intimidated by the rain. My former self-assurance melts away for a second, like butter on a bagel. I'm reluctant to drive forward, but a small voice inside me urges me on. "Don't be a wuss. Drive cautiously." And that's what I do, down the empty streets that are so misty, dark, heavily flooded with water. My rubber wheels are spraying up large volumes of water. I can feel my wheels don't have great traction on the road with all this flooding. I'm one of few cars on the open road, as most people have wisely heeded to the weather warnings. My sister switches on the car radio. We hear the DJ warning listeners tuning into his station about the weather. "Terrible, pugnacious conditions out there, folks, on the open road. You don't want to be out there tonight if you can possibly avoid it. There's been a great deal of flooding on some of the roads. Several accidents have been reported. The best advice we can offer is to stay at home and listen to some great music we've lined up for you this evening. You won't be disappointed, folks." "See," says my sister, "we told you we weren't overreacting. This untamed weather is ferocious." She's tuning in to her cell phone. I can see relief washing over her face. "The party's off," she pipes. "I've just received an SMS. It seems that the marquee is flooded. We have to go back home after all." I suddenly feel annoyance surging up inside me. My sister's face looks jubilantly smug. I feel so annoyed with her. "So you're happy you're getting your way?" I said, turning the car around, looking distinctly peeved and bitterly disappointed. "Yes, I am, if you must know, sis. No one should be driving in threatening conditions like this." "I'm not going to lie. I'm very relieved," pipes Dylan. "It's actually quite scary driving with the rain bucketing down, and the wind is so forceful. You can't see a bloody thing through your windscreen. The rain is coming down in sheets. I don't mind admitting I'm very glad we're going back home." Sulkily, I turn around my car. But for the return journey home, a mere 8 minutes away, the roads have become infinitely more treacherous in what seems like a matter of seconds. I turned down a road that on the surface seems better drained than most, and clearer. Like a fool, I pressed down the accelerator slightly harder. Then, to my horror, before I have a chance to slow down significantly, my wheels ominously skate over a vast pool of water. Then my car aquaplanes above this water, flying forwards, skidding violently, slamming violently into a large tree, with such an unmerciful, forceful impact that the front of the car is almost completely obliterated. I steadfastly close my eyes as I remember that poignant, acrimonious moment when my life was forever changed. As if squeezing my eyes somehow as tightly as I possibly can will somehow obliterate and extinguish the pernicious memories. I remember that loud impact, and then nothing, until I woke up in a hospital bed 3 days later and learnt that my sister Susan had died on impact. But luckily my brother Dylan had emerged from the accident unscathed. In truth, none of us surfaced from our accident unaltered. Our family was forever changed after that serendipitous, inadvertent night. The guilt I felt about that night hung over my life like a dark blanket of forlorn enslavement. My twin sister had been my best friend, the other half of me that made me whole. Now she was forever gone. I felt culpable for her death, but I had lost the most important person in the world to me. She was an intrinsic part of myself. I shiver with cold in the Seattle coffee shop, shrouding my presence in the furthest corner, pressing my nose against the glass pane, watching the people dashing up and down the road hurriedly, dressed in raincoats with umbrellas above their heads, as the rain buckets down. "Sorry, miss, can I get you a coffee?" says the waitress, smiling at me brightly. "A cappuccino would be lovely," I say. "Thanks. Coming up," she says, looking at me through concerned blue eyes. "Look, I don't mean to be intrusive. Tell me to mind my own business if you like. But I've noticed you here before. You seem so sad and rather lost. It's like you bury your way in the back of the coffee shop. You know, I'm a good listener. We could get together after work and talk if you like." I'm staring at the waitress in disbelief, my eyes agog. She's the splitting image of my sister Susan, which means she looks exactly like me. She's studying me closely. I think she's beginning to realize how uncannily alike we are, but she doesn't say anything about it. "I'd like that very much," I say. "The cappuccino or the chat after work sometime?" she asks. "Both," I say. "I'd like both very much." "Good," she says. I hoped you'd say that. She pulls out a pad from the pocket in front of her black apron. "Give me a call sometime," she says, passing me a note with her phone number on it. "You can put it on your cell. Call me any time you wish. You so look like you could do with a friend. By the way, my name is Steph. It's short for Stephanie. My name's Kathy Cleveland. Most people shorten it and call me Kath. Isn't it funny how people always want to shorten your name? I have a friend called Sally. Everybody calls her Sal." She laughs, and even when she laughs with her shrill musical trill, she's like my late sister Susan. It all feels so hauntingly surreal. "We'll get together now. How about that cappuccino?" "Yes, please," I nod. She returns with a cappuccino, along with a large slice of apple pie and ice cream. "It's on the house," she insists. "It's absolutely delicious. You're going to love it. It's a secret recipe." "Thanks," I pipe. She wasn't wrong. I'm well aware of how thin I've got of late, as after my sister's death, food has lost its appeal to me, and the pounds have simply dropped off me, so that my skinny jeans look like loose pants on me. But I'm tucking into this apple pie hungrily. It seems to remind me of how good it feels to actually eat again. My stomach grumbles with appreciation. I'm instantly uplifted as I nod at Steph, and she waves at me enthusiastically. "See you soon," she says. I just know that I'm going to phone her, for it's like a piece of Susan has suddenly resurfaced in my life, and I have to see this girl again. I am gobsmacked as I scrutinize the address that Steph has given me over the cell. I agreed to join Steph along with her family for lunch. I'm looking forward to seeing her again. Not too sure about her family, though. But she was very eager for me to meet them for some reason. I can barely contain my exuberant enthusiasm to see Steph again. Not only does she look the splitting image of Susan, but her personality and mannerisms are a perfect match. And when you've lost your twin sister, your hankering to get that other half of you back again is unrelenting.
The address that Steph has given me is for a house in Denny Blaine, otherwise known as Harrison, in King County, which is one of Seattle's richest, most affluent neighborhoods, northeast of downtown Seattle, bounded to the east by Lake Washington, tucked between Madrona and Madison Park. It makes no sense to me. How can a young waitress, who's roughly my age or possibly older, who at the best should be living in student digs, or possibly with her parents in a rather mediocre residence, as she's a waitress, of course, be residing in a place as illustrious as this? I walked down the large pavement lined with maple trees, past fabulously grandiose properties, overlooking gorgeous picturesque waterfront views and viridescent green front yards, with the ornate properties fringed by pristine hedges and manicured lawns. I stand outside the front of a rococo, ostentatious 3-story rectangular-shaped white colonial home, with florid gabled roofs, symmetrical windows, black shutters. I notice sandstone steps that lead to the elegant Baroque black front door. There's a welcome mat, and lined on either side of this mat is a single glazed black plant pot, planted up with a lollipop red rose tree, bursting with pretty blooms. I open the white modern-style gate and walk stealthily down a stunning stoned paved pathway to the front door. I can feel the butterflies flouncing up and down my stomach. I recheck the address. Can this really be where Steph lives? Surely not, but there is no doubt. This is indeed the right address. I knock on the door. I hear light feet padding towards the doorway. Steph opens it. Her feet are bare. She's wearing a pretty elegant 60s-style sleeveless sundress in yellow. But once again, looking at her, it's rather like seeing a ghost, or my double, because she looks exactly like me. "Don't just stand there gawking," she laughs. "Do please come in." I walked into the house and gasp. It's so stunningly beautiful, with its high ornamental ceilings, chandeliers and arched doorways. "Do you live here?" I ask. "Yeah, this is my family home. But I don't understand. You're a waitress. You work in a coffee shop." "That's right. My father owns the coffee shop, among many other local businesses. My aunt manages the shop, actually. I sometimes help out when she's short-staffed." "I had no idea. I was expecting you to live in a student digs, or a rather mediocre residence. I feel a wee bit intimidated. I don't live anywhere as sumptuously glamorous or gilded like this. I feel positively second class, if you must know. If you saw my house, or where my parents live, you'd possibly pass out from its simplicity. I sincerely doubt that. Come in," she laughs. "I won't bite. You must meet my family. They're simply dying to meet you." I'm quickly led into a large, bright white kitchen that gleams and twinkles in the morning light, with fabulous waterfront views. But 3 pairs of eyes stare at me, and the shock on their faces is evident. It's like they're staring at a ghost, and have lost all power of being able to speak. A very elegant woman in her late 50s, early 60s, who is slender and clad in a stylish Ralph Lauren pair of blue pants, Calvin Klein white cotton shirt with gold buttons. She impulsively rushes up to me, cupping my face in her hands, her eyes brimming with tears, her hands trembling. "Molly! Molly!" she says, looking at me with awe and wonderment. "Is that you?" I naturally stiffen. My skin flushes bright red. I feel awkward and uncomfortable, like a goldfish being gawked at in an opaque bowl, with nowhere to hide. "Excuse my wife," says the man, his face colouring with embarrassment. "It's very nice to meet you, Kath. Steph has told us all about you. We are so pleased to have you joining us for lunch today. When Steph told us she had found her doppelganger, I thought she was exaggerating, but it seems she wasn't making it up. She was telling us you kept coming into the cafe for coffee, but when she got up close to you, she was shocked to be staring back at herself. She's right. The likeness between the two of you is quite uncanny." I'm surprised by this revelation. Is that the reason Steph invited me over to her house? Because I was a look-alike, I wonder. The son stands up and stares at me. I'm struck by how alike his sister he looks. He's smiling broadly at me, looking at me up and down. "My name's Simon. I'm Steph's twin brother." At this, I am so stunned. Steph is also a twin.
This shocking revelation causes my eyes to well up with tears. I embarrass myself by allowing them to roll down my cheeks in an uncontrollable flood. I try to choke them back, but I fail to restrain the sobs that come bursting out of my throat. The last thing in the world I ever wanted to do is to humiliate myself like this in front of 4 strangers that are staring at me and that I barely know. But I cannot help myself. What must these people think of me? I'm a complete basket case, I'm sure that's what they're thinking. I'm surprised by the way they react, as 4 pairs of genuinely concerned eyes are focused on me. "Sorry, did I say something?" said Simon, looking rather bemused. The next thing I find is that Steph's mother is holding me so generously in her arms, with such a warm, affectionate tenderness, as if I was her only daughter. She's rocking me backwards and forwards, kissing the top of my hair benevolently. She smells of lemon and neroli blossom. I feel immediately pacified. "There, there," she says in such a mollifying, soothing tone of voice. "Everything's going to be just all right. Everything's going to be fine. I promise you that." Before I know it, I'm ushered to the central island to sit on a fabulously comfortable bar chair, and boxes of tissues are handed to me, as well as a large glass of fizzy Coca-Cola, which I drink back gratefully. The central island, with its white marbled surfaces with grey veins feeding through the marble, remind me of a block of Stilton cheese. I run my hands over the shiny, smooth surface. The doorbell rings. I hear Steph's mother say, "Steph, get that, won't you? I think that's our lunch. It's arrived." Steph returns with 2 large brown paper bags in her hands, filled with warm takeaway cardboard containers of food that have been delivered to the door. She places the bags on the marbled surface and gives me a friendly wink. "Are you feeling better?" she asks. I nod. So this is how the rich live, I think to myself. They order everything so they don't have to cook. No wonder the kitchen looks so spotless, as if no one has ever dared boil even an egg on the range gas hob. I watch as Steph's mother tips out all the hot food into warm white casserole containers, and then beckons to me. She hands me a piping hot plate, which she holds in her hands. Then she asks me to help myself from a medley of mixed dishes. I settle for rice and sweet and sour pork. "I'm sorry," I said, breaking the silence. "I do want to apologise for my outburst earlier. I didn't mean to burst into tears in front of you like that. It was just Simon mentioning he was a twin. That really upset me, you see. It got me going." There was a long pause, as all eyes focused on me, while I continued to explain myself. I take in a large, deep breath. "You see, I was a twin once. Well, a year ago. My sister died in a car accident. I'm still struggling to come to terms with her death. Losing a twin, well, it's like losing a part of yourself. You never get over it." Steph's mother looks at me sympathetically. She almost makes me want to cry again. She takes my hand in hers, giving it a tight squeeze. "We understand that, more than you might know, dear." "You poor, poor thing," says Steph, reaching out to give my other hand a squeeze. "No wonder you've been coming to the coffee shop, looking as if the weight of the world is on your shoulders, and you hide away in the far corner. My aunt was the first one to notice you. She kept saying to me, 'That poor, poor girl over there in the far corner. She looks so desperately sad. I think she's around your age. She could so do with a friend.' But when I came up to you, and I realised you looked identical to me, it freaked me out. I tell you, I got the shock of my life. I'm not going to kid." "Me too," I said. "You look identical to my sister, which means you look identical to me. But your mannerisms and your personality are eerily like Susan's." "So tell me," says Steph's mother, looking at me kindly, "how did your sister die in this accident?" "It was all my fault. I was responsible for my sister's death," I explained, telling them the entire story from start to finish. The kitchen becomes incredibly quiet. No one lifts a fork. The food becomes cold, as everyone listens to me intently. Every word I speak holds their immediate attention, almost as if beyond what I am sharing with them is of little significance, for it would seem apart from my voice you could have heard a pin drop. This time it's Steph's father that gets up and gives me a warm, effusive hug. His eyes are filled with such tender compassion. Now you listen to me, young lady, and you listen to me very hard. You are not responsible for the actions of others. You understand me?
But if it wasn't for me, my sister would not have been in that car.
Let me ask you something, he says to me. Supposing I decide to take a ride on the roundabout at a fairground. I urge you to come along with me. I tell you, come on, get on to the roundabout with me. But you decline. Finally, you decide to get on the ride. You end up being killed on that ride as you accidentally are flung off the roundabout. Am I responsible for your death? Tell me that.
No, you weren't to know what would happen. You didn't force me to take that ride with you, did you? I chose to get onto the roundabout myself.
Precisely. And your sister and your brother that night knew two things. One, they knew you wanted to go to that party. And two, they knew that they were taking a risk when they got into that car with you.
I nodded. I suppose so.
They knew the weather was treacherous, so when they climbed into the car with you, they were putting themselves at risk. What happened to them was a consequence of bad weather, tumultuous conditions, and a risk that they were willing to take. Do you understand that?
I suppose so, I say.
My dad's absolutely right. You are not responsible. None of this is your fault, says Simon. But we both know what it's like to lose a twin sister. We're in exactly the same boat as you, are we not, Steph? We live with the loss every day. It's like we sense a part of us is missing.
Steph nods. Her face looks sad and reflective.
You lost a sister, I gasped. I had no idea. I'm sorry, when did this happen?
This happened when we were very young. Me and Simon have no memory of the event. But all these years later we feel her loss, as she was my identical twin sister. You see, me, Simon, and my sister Molly, we were triplets, but Molly and I were identical. Even though we grew up without ever knowing Molly, we always felt her loss, which is why when I saw you in the coffee shop, part of me wondered if you could be Molly. But I see now that that is certainly not the case. But even so, I feel as if I've got my twin sister back, as odd as it sounds. It's rather surreal.
That is why, when my wife saw you looking identical to Steph, she felt as if Molly had returned from the dead, so to speak.
What happened to Molly? Now it's the family's turn to be silent. I notice eyes darting across the table in secret exchanges, and that's when I realise they're negotiating whether to tell me the secret or not. I suddenly see Steph's mother bringing out wine glasses to the table. She asks me if I drink wine. I nod. She pours us large glasses of Sauvignon Blanc. It'll be a pleasure for me to tell you our story, Kath. Not only because you look identical to my daughter Steph, which means you also look identical to Molly, but you've allowed yourself to get vulnerable with us today, and I really appreciate that a lot. You've courageously opened your heart to us, even blaming yourself for your sister's death, which I might add is nonsensical, as you're certainly not responsible for her death. So please stop persecuting yourself for it. I'll tell you one thing about you, Kath. You possibly don't know this, but you've got guts, girl. You should be proud of your courage. Despite everything, including your grief, you're still fighting strong. And the fact that you're here today, opening your heart up to us, we feel truly honoured about that. I also do not believe in coincidences. I think that Molly has sent you to us today, to bring us back the sister and daughter we lost. I'm in no doubt that for both Steph and Simon, your presence here today is filling that empty hole in their lives, which you have already done for us with your presence when you walked through that door. I saw your face for the first time, and when I did, a dead part of me came alive again. You see that pretty beauty spot on your left-hand cheek? You know what is the most bizarre thing of all? Is that one distinguishing feature that helped me to tell my kids apart is that Steph did not have a mole, but Molly had it, and so do you, in exactly the same spot. How old are you, dear? She asks me. I'm 22. Well, Kathy and Simon are both 23. If I didn't know any better, I would say you were a reincarnation of my lost daughter. Even your energy reminds me of the child I've lost. I must admit it is extraordinary, I do feel right at home with all of you, I admit. How did Molly die, I ask? Well, we assume she's dead, dear, but we never recovered her body.
Go on, Mum. Tell Kath the story.
It is my story to tell, admits Steph's mother. But I will say this, I will understand, dear, if you find the story implausible or seemingly fictitious. If the truth be told, what transpired was so bizarre to me that I found it even hard to comprehend what had actually happened. I hasten to say that beyond these 4 walls, you will be the only person we have ever told. So I hope we can guarantee on your discretion. Of course. Very well, let me start at the beginning, as that's the best place to start. Me and my husband were staying in an RV on a vacation. In those early years, we didn't have a lot of money. As we were just starting up, we were very young, very naive, and we weren't always wealthy, you know. My husband here is one of those natural high flyers who does make things happen, which is how we made our money. Needless to say, we were staying in a vacant camping ground near the Cascades National Park, I think it was. We wanted our privacy, to be in a spot on our own. We found an idyllic place by the silvery lake of water surrounded by weeping willows, and in the furthest distance you could see the rise and fall of the mountains. A farmer had bought the old campground in order to extend his land further, so he gave us permission to stay there. One field was full of black and white dappled cows, and there was a wooded area beyond the pond, consisting mainly of Douglas firs and ponderosa pine trees, I think. The great thing about this spot was it was an area that had once been a campground, so it invariably meant that there were a lot of open trails, and even old picnic sites and chairs and benches, and open barbecues available for us to use, so we thought we were very privileged to have this place all to ourselves. But certainly in hindsight, it may have been our biggest undoing. I remember it was late evening. We had a tent that was surrounding the edge of our RV, where I had my 3 babies lying fast asleep together in the cot, close to the opening of the tent, so that I could check on them regularly, and that's what I invariably did. We were barbecuing the meat that evening, and I quickly went back to the tent to get some salad dressing, and that was when I saw her. I stood there staring at her in horror. I didn't have a clue what she was. I mean, I'd never seen a thing like this before. The creature was female. She was about 7 to 8 foot tall, was covered in long flowing dark brown hair, which had a lovely shine to it, and almost looked as if it had been brushed. It was silky and healthy looking, rather like human hair. I noticed her arms were overlong, her legs so powerful and sturdy. She was very intimidating and daunting in size, and she was so powerfully built, with a robust body. I think the thing that astonished me the most was she had such a human face, and her deep-set dark eyes were desperately sad. I just stood there staring at her. I didn't scream or feel any fear. I guess I was so nonplussed at what I was perceiving that I almost felt I was caught up in a dream from which I would surely awaken. The creature was holding Molly in her arms, rocking her backwards and forwards, and looking at her lovingly. She looked up at me with bright eyes, and I heard her say to me, "You have 3, and I have none. I will take care of her, I promise you." It was then I grabbed hold of her hairy arm. I said, "No, you don't." I tried to grab my baby from her, but she pushed me very gently away, and she glided off with my baby. I stood there for a second, hardly daring to believe what had happened. I quickly ran after the creature, screaming, "Please don't! Please give her back to me! I want my baby back!" I was absolutely distraught. The creature, I now realized, was a Bigfoot, but she had long gone. When I told my husband what had happened, he said the police would never take us seriously if we told them a Bigfoot had taken our baby. So we had to pretend that we returned to the tent and our baby had gone missing. So, of course, the police searched the wood groves around here. They found absolutely nothing. I knew I would never see my Molly again. "Oh, I'm sorry," I said. "That's such a tragic story." It is, and I know it's going to sound completely incongruous and rather irrational, but I certainly don't hate or despise the Bigfoot for stealing Molly, as you might expect I would. I often think of how desperately sad she was. Her shoulders were hunched over. I got the distinct impression she wanted more than anything in the world to have a baby of her own, and God had not blessed her in that regard. I think she was barren, and so in total desperation she stole my baby. So I have actually forgiven her, but I certainly can't forget what transpired.
as losing a baby is monumental. It's a loss in every way. And you never come to terms with it. But your being here today is like bringing Molly back for me, because you look exactly like she did. It's quite extraordinary, really. To cut a long story short, in the years that followed, I became incredibly close to the Cumberland family. I think I filled a hole in their lives, as they did in mine. Steph became to me like my twin sister Susan that I missed so desperately much. She possessed all the quintessential qualities and quirky characteristics of my sister. If that wasn't weird enough, my brother married Susan, so she also became a sister-in-law to me. And I married Simon. So we became one big happy family. Simon and I have had 2 identical twin girls, and Steph gave birth to identical boy triplets. It's so weird that a double-ganger I encountered in a coffee shop certainly changed my life forever. But I have let go of the guilt. I can't punish myself for the rest of my life for what happened that fateful day to Susan. And if there is one lesson I've learnt in life, we have to learn to forgive ourselves. So there you are. That's my story.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, after the birth of my baby Harry, my mother-in-law Maggie was doggedly determined that I was not going to return to work, like she had done when my husband Ian had been born. Maggie was an effusive, gregarious character who'd been deeply entrenched in the fashion industry. She had jet-setted around the globe with her fabulous designer creations. She would watch top models modelling some of her upmarket exclusive designer ranges that had been particularly popular in Milan and Paris. She would also frequent London Fashion Week, Milan Fashion Week, and New York Fashion Week. Maggie had been incredibly passionate about fashion. Leaving her son Ian in the charge of a nanny was the biggest compunction in her entire life. Maggie is sitting with me in my baby's nursery. Although she's no longer in the fashion industry, the residue of her career can be clearly seen, not only in her elegant, flamboyant, rather chic deportment, but by everything she wears, and more to the point, how she actually wears it. My mother-in-law can make a dowdy pair of jeans look like $1 million, with the use of jackets, scarves, costume jewellery and belts. Today she is wearing a classic Chanel navy blue dress, with a string of pearls, staring adoringly at her grandchild's cot. She looks every part the most adoring grandmother, completely obsessed, enchanted and besotted by her grandson. "Doesn't he look just like Ian?" she says proudly. "You think so?" I ask. I can't help thinking at this age my baby doesn't look like anyone particular. Maggie looks at me with a wholehearted, resolute expression upon her face. She clasps her hands tightly together in a prayer-like position. "Please, please, Victoria dear, don't you dare ever go back to work. Well, not at the moment anyway. I beg you. If there's any self-reproach or contrition I have in my life, it's going straight back to work in the fashion industry when Ian was born. I missed out on so much. I've always regretted it with a wistful, nostalgic longing, as if I could go back in time. By golly, I would do things differently." "Maggie, you had a phenomenal career in the fashion industry. Oh, come on, you don't regret that, surely. Think about all the exemplary designer creations that were setting the catwalks alight with your bedazzling designs. That's art. How could you ever be remorseful about that?" "Actually, I am, dear. Very much, if you must know. I'll tell you what's good about being in my 60s. I've actually grown up. I ruefully regret that it took me so long to get my head together. I must say I like myself much more as an older person now. The problem is when I was so young, I was so naive, immature, driven, impetuous, flighty, impulsively ambitious. Let's just say I think that those are the unfortunate adjectives that best describe me. I placed so little significance on what actually mattered. But when you get to my ripe, wizened old age, you begin to learn that the only things of any real consequence and of momentous noteworthiness are those you love, your friends, your family. When you're younger, your priorities are warped. When I was 25, I was shooting for the stars. I was so self-absorbed. Are you saying if you could do things differently, you would? Oh, definitely. I regret not being there when my son said his first word, when he took his first steps. That time in a baby's life goes by far too fast.
And not to be part of your child's metamorphosis, I think is such a dreadful pity. If you ask any mother, they will tell you that where did the time go to when my child was a baby, as it went so fast. But I really want to go back to my job, I exclaimed. Well, I'm sure you can make a plan, dear. Later on, though. Work part-time, perhaps. But not at this critical time in your son's life. I really believe he needs his mother. I promise you that you'll be so glad you took my sagacious advice. I'm not just a pretty face, you know. One day you'll be thanking me. You'll be glad you were there when your son had his first birthday, rather than cleaning someone's bedpan in a hospital. Think about it. What is more efficaciously profitable to you emotionally? Well, when you put it like that, I think being at my son's first birthday trumps cleaning someone's bedpan any time of the week. Exactly, my dear. Finally she gets it, says Maggie, looking at me, as if the weight of the world has been lifted off her shoulders. My baby begins to cry. Maggie lifts him out of his cot very tenderly, putting my 2-month-old son onto her knee. She begins to rock him gently in her arms. There, little one, she says, kissing Zack on the forehead. Zack immediately begins to calm down. He gurgles jubilantly. A little smile is on his bonny face as he stares up at Maggie with bright big blue eyes. He regurgitates some of my milk all over Maggie's perfect blue Chanel dress, but she doesn't even bat an eyelid. It's rather amusing to see my stylish-looking mother-in-law covered with my baby's vomit, as there would have been a time when she would have been repulsed by her dress being soiled like this, but not any more. I pass her a damp piece of kitchen towel. Once she replaces Zack in his cot, she wipes her dress down with a huge grin on her face. Oh, babies, she laughs. They do make such a mess. I must admit, in her company, I do feel rather dowdy. I've never been very fashionable myself. I tend to dress for comfort, but Maggie seems to like the fact that I'm prudently down to earth, so that's a very good thing. As acrimonious as she was so good with my son. Ian loved her to death. I was gutted when his first words were Nana, and not Mama or Dada. Well, it's hardly surprising, I say. I mean, his nanny was around him all the time. You and your husband were working full-time. Well, that's my point, dear. Someone else was looking after my baby. Ian was bonding with a stranger. Sometimes when I would pick him up in my arms, he would start screaming and having a tantrum. Then Nanny Curtis would take him away from me and put him in her arms, and she would calm him down at once. It made me feel like my baby wasn't even my own. I mean, I should have been the one calming my baby down, certainly not Nanny Curtis. I used to feel surplus to requirements, almost as if my baby didn't even belong to me. It's rather like owning a beautiful dress that you lend to somebody else, and you're consumed with the green-eyed monster, as you want to be wearing that dress yourself. You're wondering why you ever lent it to a perfect stranger or even a friend. You really regret it. And by the way, while we're on the subject of nannies, dear, you absolutely need to get help with baby Zack, as looking after a baby is exhausting, very draining, a plethora of work. You want to thoroughly enjoy every minute of being a mother. You could get yourself an au pair or a nanny to help you share the responsibility, so you can still function efficiently, with someone helping you around the house. It'll mean you can shoot off to town, enjoy a coffee and adult company with your friends. It's imperative for you to have some quality time to yourself, or you might begin to start resenting your own baby, and you certainly don't want that to happen with precious little Zack. When Maggie had left, I reflected on her shrewd, judicious words. I always think young people should listen to older people, reciprocacious advice. You can learn from their mistakes. I was amazed that Maggie so wished she had spent more time with her baby, rather than showing off her dazzling creations down some of the illustrious catwalks in both Paris and Milan. That was sententiously eye-opening and evocatively redolent to me. It would make perfect sense to me, as a child is a baby for such a short period of time, and missing out on your baby growing up seems like an awful pity. I do know that mothers get exhausted and completely overwhelmed. All parents need a break from their children to enjoy some adult company. I decided my mother-in-law was absolutely right. So began my search for a nanny for little Zack. I would pay them to help me around the house and to babysit Zack when I went out. Of course, I had heard shuddersome stories about people who had hired insouciant and apathetically negligent nannies, with disastrous repercussions.
Ostensibly for me, bringing someone you didn't know to live with us under my roof was rather scary. I knew I'd have to take the interview business rather seriously. It seemed that everyone that came to my door for an interview was not suitable. I needed to feel a compatible rapport with the nanny, if she was going to live with me under my roof with me and my husband, becoming a harmonious member of our family. I think the agency I was dealing with thought I was over-particular, far too fussy. But Mrs. Rockingham, they'd say to me, I assure you that Nicole is an excellent nanny. She comes with brilliant references. I don't care how good her references are, I would say. I've got to live with this girl under my roof. And if I don't like her, and there's no mutual conviviality between us, this arrangement will never ever work. I could almost hear them sighing on the other end of the phone in exasperation, as if I was being unreasonably difficult and asking for way too much. I'm almost certain they'd say to their colleagues, It's that punctilious taxing woman again, Mrs. Rockingham. It seems there's no pleasing some people. The woman is so ponderously demanding. I don't care how much I frustrated them, as my standards were high. I was being very particular about the type of person I was looking for. I'm sorry I wasn't simply prepared to settle for the status quo. I didn't want to be one of those people who went through a plethora of nannies like a bag of burritos or a box of chocolate candies. In truth, I just didn't warm to any of the nannies I met, for there was always something bothersome about them that niggled me. I'm a great believer in trusting your instincts. I met young, giggly, bemused, inattentive girls who seemed that they were easily distracted by their boyfriends calling them on their cell phones, so they might not concentrate on little Zack, who was my greatest priority. Many of these young women may have been as frivolous as Maggie when she was their age. Then there was the condescending type that I would dread having in my house. They'd probably make me feel like an atrocious mother and be quick to point out all my grievous mistakes. I could see by their surly, humorless faces that having them in my house would be as much fun as living with Scrooge from the Christmas Carol, a pretty miserable experience. Luckily in the end it was my mother-in-law Maggie who came through for me. She said she knew of an excellent nanny from Norway who had American ancestry on her father's side. It appears her dad was born in North Carolina. I was to learn that this lovely young lady was hoping to live in America one day, and would love to have a live-in job as a nanny, in order to decide whether in the long term she would consider emigrating here. She was such a nice, down-to-earth girl. Her name was Layla Stratton. I think you're going to like her. She's got a quirky personality, a dry sense of humour. I think the two of you will hit it off right away. I happen to think she's a keeper. So Layla Stratton moved into our farmhouse that is situated outside of Portland, northeast from Salem, and close to the Silver Falls State Park, where our family lives, in a colonial revival 2-story white farmhouse with a grey slate roof, black shutters, and a pedimented doorway with porch. From the moment I met Layla, we clicked and had a mutual affection for each other. Truly, I don't know how I would have managed without her. It was great to have her convivial company when I felt like having a glass of wine from the Willamite Valley with an adult. She was indispensable in every regard to me, especially when my son suffered from terrible colic. Layla was delighted to move into my farmhouse. She loved the countryside, was a keen rider, so the two of us would sometimes go riding together on some of the riding trails close to the house when my husband would watch over little Zack for us. Layla described herself as the quintessential country girl, who actually could never envisage herself living in a city. She loved the fact that we had chickens ambling around our farmhouse, horses frolicking happily in the meadows, and that we had a stable block, a barn, an orchard, a large pond, and a wood grove. One day when I returned to my farmhouse, having had coffee with friends in town, I popped to the store to buy a few groceries, and returned home with a brown bag in my hand, putting it onto the kitchen counter, along with my purse and car keys. I entered the kitchen. Everything seemed airily quiet. All I could hear was the ominous ticking of the kitchen clock, that seemed unusually loud. "Layla! Layla, I'm back!" But there was no response. I was bewildered to see that the back kitchen door had been left wide open, which was exceedingly unusual. I closed it, thinking that Layla must have accidentally left it open. I glanced briefly out of the window. I could see 3 of our horses romping happily in the field. "Layla, are you there?" I called. "I'm back." But there was no answer. I quickly darted up the sweeping ornate oakwood staircase, calling Layla's name again. Layla! Layla, where are you? Layla! Layla! But there was absolutely no response. It was very weird. Where the heck was she? I dashed into my son's pale yellow nursery and was relieved to see Zack lying fast asleep in his cot. But Layla, she was nowhere to be found. Stranger still was the baby monitor wasn't connected. That was exceedingly unusual. Layla always put the baby monitor on. She would never leave Zack unattended, but then where on earth was she? I began calling Layla's name, frantically searching every room in the house. I entered her bedroom. Her bed, as usual, was meticulously made. Her clothes were neatly lined up in the closet. Her purse, cell phone and car keys were sitting on the dressing table. So Layla hadn't even gone out. But where was she? I darted out of the house, wondering if Layla had gone out for a breath of fresh air. I searched the stable block extensively, the barn, the meadows, but Layla was nowhere to be found. Now I was getting unduly concerned. I could feel a bitter nausea rising up in the back of my throat. Something wasn't right. Even my stomach was churning violently, while my heartbeat had increased significantly, as it drummed loudly in my chest. Don't panic, I told myself. Calm down. Maybe she went for a walk in the woodgrove. That was it, I told myself. Of course, she went for a walk in the woods. She never abandoned Zack before. But then, of course, there was a first time for everything. I began to hastily run into the woods. It was a magnificently beautiful morning. The woodgrove twinkled in the morning light. The tall, big leaf maples, the white oaks and ponderosa pines, all well advanced in maturity, rose up into the sky like masterful, viridescent skyscrapers. I'd always appreciated the oak trees in our woods, as they are fabulously big, impressively imposing, with wide outstretched arms that effusively welcome me, always like reliable friends that you can trust. The atmosphere in the wood this morning was so congenial, tranquil, and very uplifting. So much so that for a brief moment I almost forgot my angst. Well, almost. I was transfixed by this mesmerizing space. For me, this woodland sanctuary always uplifted my spirits. The canopy above my head sprinkled its sparkling gossamer light onto the dark, fertile earthen floor, peppering it in different light shades. The verdant feathery ferns, variegated ground covers, Spanish mosses swept across the ground in a rich green, resplendent, textured carpet. It was so magnificent to behold. I could hear the sweet trills and tweets of the birds filtering through the pleasing sanctuary, and then I froze when I discovered Layla's yellow flowery scarf, entangled in a bramble bush, caught up in the thorny briars. Now I was grievously concerned. It certainly meant that Layla had been in the woods. I called out her name, running up and down the undulating trails, but there was no answer. I was now really rather frightened. I had to return to the farmhouse, but I wasn't certain what I should do. Did I call the police, or was I overreacting? I mean, maybe she would be coming back in any moment. I decided to give Layla an extra hour. That's what I would do. And if she hadn't returned, I would then definitely call the police. I quickly made myself a cup of coffee to calm my frazzled nerves, and I looked in on my baby Zack. Where was Layla? Where was she? An hour later I'd phoned up the police. I did feel a level of reassurance when the police vehicle drove up my drive. Its wheels crunched the pebbles beneath hardy rubber tyres. 2 officers climbed out of the vehicle. I heard the knocker being rapped. I quickly answered the door, dutifully guiding both the officers into my living room. I'm Officer Jones. This is Officer Miller. How can we be of help to you? Please take a seat, I said, pointing to the upholstered chairs in my living room. Both men sat side by side on the settee, looking authoritative and businesslike, which brought me a measure of reassurance. These astute, sharp-witted men would find Layla. I was sure of it. Officer Jones looked like the more senior detective. He appeared to be in his 60s, while the other officer looked considerably younger, as if he was in his 30s. Officer Jones brought out a notepad from his pocket. He studied me intently, through shrewd, assertive brown eyes. So you say that your nanny has gone missing? That's right, I said. Look, I don't know if I'm overreacting, officers. All I know is she should be back at the moment, but it's not like her to go off like this.
She's been working for me for over a year now. I know her very well. I find her to be considerably reliable. Also, her SUV is parked in our driveway. I checked her bedroom. Her car keys, cell phone and wallet are both on her dressing table. Now, she'd never leave without them, so this is exceedingly odd. I don't understand where she could have got to. I agree. It is very peculiar, said Officer Miller, rubbing a finger across his cleanly shaven chin. So you believe her going off like this is enigmatic behaviour?
Most definitely, officers. This is incongruous behaviour for her at the best of times. I searched for her absolutely everywhere. I did find her yellow scarf caught up in the briars in the woodgrove. Both of the officers exchanged concerned looks between each other.
We'll be needing that scarf for DNA analysis, he said. Now, could you tell me what Layla looks like?
Well, she's half Norwegian, half American. Her dad's actually from North Carolina. She's quite tall, about 5'7", 5'8", I think. Slender with long blonde hair that's very straight and shiny, with bangs. She has fair skin, blue eyes. She's pretty.
Do you know what she was wearing today?
I tried to rack my brains. What was she wearing? I'm sorry, Detective, I said, waving my hand. I'm just trying to think for a moment. She's a quirky bohemian dresser. Let's see. Yes, she was wearing white pants this morning, a long mustard jersey jacket sweater. It trailed beyond her knees. The yellow scarf as well, but as you know, that got caught up in the briars. I think she was also wearing a white blouse with a thin gold belt. That's right, she was wearing a gold belt. Officer Miller scribbled all the details down attentively.
Do you have a photograph of your nanny on hand?
Yes, I do. Hold on a second. I won't be a minute, I said, dashing to the kitchen area of our open-plan living room cum kitchen. I quickly opened my purse, pulling out my cell phone. Briefly clicking onto the photograph section, I paused for a moment to make a decision. This is a good one, I think. I have a photograph here, I say to the officers. They both take a snap of my picture on their cell phones.
Was there anything uncustomary, ma'am, when you came back from coffee with your friends this morning?
Yes, actually there was. I noticed the baby monitor was off, which is exceedingly unusual. You see, this is a big farmhouse, so we leave the monitor on at all times. Oh yes, and the back kitchen door was left wide open. It's never left open like that, which was decidedly odd and atypical. This time it was the young Officer Miller who asked me a question.
Ma'am, if I may trouble you for a moment, I'd like to ask you about your nanny's demeanour of late. She hasn't been depressed recently, or troubled in any way. You haven't seen any changes in her personality?
No, she's always easygoing, fun-loving, happy, cracking jokes. This morning was no different to that.
So what was the last thing she was doing this morning? Can you remember?
Well, she was eating a cream cheese bagel. She was drinking coffee at about 8 o'clock in the morning.
Do you mind, ma'am, if we take a quick look around the place? We'll also need a DNA sample from her hairbrush. Is that all right with you?
Officer Miller was on his cell phone, asking for a couple of people to bring over some sniffer dogs to the house. I'm surprised, I said. I thought you needed 72 hours before you search for a missing person.
Depends on the case, really. This one is idiosyncratic and rather unorthodox. And given you found that scarf on some thorny briars, we need to search the woodgrove to see if the sniffer dogs pick up a scent. We'll also be checking your pond, obviously.
The police arrived on the scene. They began to thoroughly search for Layla everywhere, but there appeared to be no sight or sound of her. Did the dogs pick up anything? I asked.
Yes, they picked up her trail in the woods, but then it comes to a very mysterious, rather ambiguous, paradoxical, almost abrupt end. Very bizarre indeed. But for a moment we've done all we can do. But we will certainly keep you posted at all times. It will seem that your nanny did go into the woods, but the scent trail just stops. Very curious indeed.
So you think she definitely went into the woods then?
It would seem so.
For the next couple of days, the police continued to search for Layla, without much luck. She had been registered as a missing person. Her DNA had also been put on record. It would seem like many of those 411 cases you hear about, Layla had elliptically disappeared into thin air, and both my husband and my mother-in-law were exceedingly troubled about Layla's welfare.
for none of us could comprehend what had happened to her. "This is very peculiar, darling," Maddie said to me. "It strikes me as exceedingly odd that Layla goes into the wood grove, the sniffer dogs lose her scent near an oak tree. I mean, how on earth does that ever happen?" "I don't know," I said. "I agree with you. It is idiosyncratic behaviour for Layla. She was such an authentic, dependable nanny. I don't honestly know what's going on." "Well, I spoke to Officer Jones. It seems he can't get hold of the Strattons. That's Layla's parents. I gather they're celebrating their 20th wedding anniversary. The husband took his wife somewhere remote, very obscure, so they can't contact them. But maybe in the circumstances it's a good thing, because I really believe we're going to find her. I'm sure we are." "You do?" I asked. "Well, I do, as it happens. I'm quite intuitive. I really believe she's still alive." "Well, Officer Jones thinks something nefarious could have happened to her. He says it's a possibility. He believes she might have been running from someone because of her scarf being caught up in those briars. He thinks they could have kidnapped or abducted her. He said that's a distinct possibility." "Of course, we do have to consider that," says Maddie. "He's right about that. Anything could have happened to her. But let's not jump to conclusions until we have some proper answers. And let's keep our fingers crossed that Layla will turn up as right as rain." It was on the 4th night that I suddenly woke with a start, almost certain I'd heard something, but I wasn't quite sure what. I sat up and listened intently. I knew I'd heard something, and then I heard it again. It sounded like someone was banging on the kitchen door very, very loudly. So I immediately bounded down the staircase like a jackrabbit, racing to the door, my heart pounding in my chest violently. Please God, may that be Layla," I was praying inwardly. So imagine my surprise when I was to discover that Layla was indeed at our front door. There were leaves and twigs in her hair. Dirt was strewn all over her face. Her white trousers were badly shredded. She was covered in dirt. "Where have you been?" I asked, taking Layla into my arms. "We've been worried sick about you. What happened to you?" Layla's story. I was sitting in the kitchen on a high chair, around the kitchen island, with the white quartz countertops, thoroughly enjoying my cream cheese bagel, served with a piping hot cup of coffee, while I was flicking through the pages of a magazine, reading some of the articles. "Bye, Layla. I'm going now," Victoria says to me. "I'm just popping into town to have some coffee with friends. How do I look?" she says, doing a twirl. "You look amazing, Victoria." Victoria never normally wears dresses, but on this specific occasion she was wearing a cream tunic dress with a black belt and black court shoes, and she looked phenomenal. "What's the occasion?" I asked. "Well, it's just one of my friends, you know. She always goes to such effort to look smart, so I decided to make an effort for the occasion. I'm usually just so casual, aren't I?" "Well, you look $1 million today. When will you be back?" "I'm not sure. I won't be long. I'll pick up some groceries on the way." "Rightio. See you soon." I hear the whooshing sound of Victoria's car wheels driving down the pebbly path, and then a strange noise grabs my attention. It sounds like something with ponderous footsteps is standing outside the kitchen door. This is when I suddenly discern a big black shadowy creature in our backyard. It was looking in at me inquisitively through the kitchen door. I realised to my amazement this is an abominable snowman, or what you call in America a Bigfoot. The creature sees me. I can see he's not pleased to be seen. He quickly scurries away into the woodgrove. When the creature had looked at me, I had discerned his kind eyes that were the colour of treacle. He also had a human face that looked so gentle and benevolent. I wasn't afraid of him at all, despite his gargantuan size. In truth, he had the eyes of a lovable teddy bear that you just wanted to hug. I could see he was 8 foot tall, about 700 pounds, and built like a burly piece of farming machinery. So I ran surreptitiously after him. I was so curious. I never normally would have acted so impulsively like this, but it's not every day you see an abominable snowman. I remember growing up in Norway once. We had to write an essay in school of what kind of fairy tale-like creature we would love to encounter in real life, if only it were real, that is. Many of the kids in my class wrote about unicorns, fairies, gnomes, extraterrestrials, dinosaur, and even the Loch Ness Monster from Scotland. My essay was about the abominable snowman. I had to read my essay to the entire class because it was so good.
It was like I'd always had an inner hankering to see one of these creatures, but never for a single moment did I think that they were real. But now I was seeing one. I was not going to miss out on having a closer look at this creature. I might never get a second chance. I clandestinely entered the woodgrove with a cautious approach, but I snagged my scarf on a bunch of briars, but I ignored it, and tiptoed lightly on my feet, behind one tree after another. This outlandish critter has captivated my intrigue, hijacked my attention. Even my responsibilities as a nanny are thrown to the wayside like an abandoned bag of school books. I don't want the Bigfoot to know I'm following it. It seems so shy and evasive. I'm hoping I'll get a better look at him. I hide in the woodgrove, watching this black Bigfoot who's ambling over to this bush of berries. He's eating them, blindly oblivious to the fact that I've actually followed him, and that I'm hiding behind a tree, watching him intently. I am blown away by how magnificent he is. The next thing I know is there's a discomposing growling sound that reverberates throughout the woodgrove, with an ear-piercing vibration that could almost shatter glass. I tremble in terror. Before I see anything, I sense an intimidating, threatening presence that feels bodefully dangerous and very claustrophobic, as if something quite treacherous is drawing close to me. I turn around in abject horror to see this huge auburn-headed Bigfoot standing only a hair's breadth away from me. I had not heard his stealthful approach, but I had sensed it and smelt it. This formidable Bigfoot pulls back his thin lips to expose his huge white, human-like teeth. He's glaring at me with very menacious eyes that give off a malevolent red eyeshine. Everything about this Bigfoot's demeanour is intrinsically evil, full of a tangible hatred, almost as if every cell in his body is screaming, "Killer! Killer!" He is polar opposite to the black Bigfoot in every conceivable way, as dramatic as black is to white, as good is to evil, as an apple is from a pear. I cannot describe the fear that incarcerates every blood cell of my body, completely paralysing my adrenal response, immobilising my knees so that my legs crumble beneath me, like jelly. My heart pounds violently in my chest. I audibly hear every single beat. My mind has become clouded by a foggy, clawing mist, obscuring all my thoughts, that whirl around my head like the clothes in a spin-dryer. I have no comprehension how to react to this Bigfoot. I am so gripped by terror that I am rendered completely helpless, so that I almost surrender to its mercy. But he has none. He has me cornered from every side, unable to run away. I can smell his putrid breath misting up my face. I perceive he derives great pleasure from my trepidation, rather like a cat toying with its prey. With one powerful overlong arm he tugs me, grabbing me with one hand, tossing me up in the air as if I'm a ball. For a moment I'm airborne. As my body is launched into the air, it begins to fall. Down, down, down. I'm free-falling, as if I'm on a parachute. I scream at the top of my lungs. I know I'm about to end up pulverised on the forest floor. But the Bigfoot catches me in time. I knew he was toying with me. He tosses me up in the air again, for a second time. I feel almost resigned to my plight, almost as if my life is precariously hanging by a fine thread that will very soon be snapped. I close my eyes tightly to brace for impact. This time I'm caught by the black Bigfoot, who throws me on his back. He runs away with me into the woods. The relief I feel is immense. I know I'm in safe hands. The red-headed Bigfoot is running after us, screaming like a banshee. But for some strange, incongruous reason, he doesn't tackle the black Bigfoot, whom I notice is wearing an interesting leather bracelet upon his wrist. I'm not exactly sure why the red Bigfoot doesn't challenge him, but he certainly looks as mad as hell, and is still following us. Finally, the dark Bigfoot is climbing up the rocky elevation that could not easily be tackled by a human being unless they were using ropes and mountain climbing gear. But this critter jumps up the rocks with a fluid buoyancy, like a cat bouncing gracefully off a kitchen cabinet. He is like an acrobat in his movements. They're so fluid, powerful and agile, even with me slung over his shoulders. Before I know it, I find myself in a sprawling cave, where there's a substantial-sized female Bigfoot, along with her daughter, standing there in the cave, somewhat obscured by the darkness, but I see them more clearly when my eyes begin to adjust to the dimness. I realize it is the older son that rescued me from that rang-a-tang-coloured Bigfoot. When the male Bigfoot sees his mother, he engages in a deep, earnest conversation with her. They're talking together backwards and forwards in a very strange language. Their voices sound solemn and very troubled. The Bigfoot female is looking at me. She nods. I knew she was speaking about me, but I wasn't certain what she was saying. But she's not at all unfriendly. On the contrary, her benevolent eyes twinkle with a warm, generous kindness. The female Bigfoot turns around. She looks at me through her deep-set dark eyes. I hear her saying in my head, "You'll be safe here. You can only go back home when Bidzul gets back, when he gives you a leather bracelet to wear. Otherwise you won't be safe, as Gwitsi from the Bagalona clan will surely kill you. He's marked you as his own, or he'll keep you as his woman." I nodded in agreement. I could see that this Bigfoot family was so generously kind, and they knew what they were talking about. There's no way I want to be anywhere near that iniquitous red-headed Bigfoot. I glanced briefly around the cave. It's pleasantly cosy and snug, generously lined with deer skins. Deer antlers are hanging on the cave walls, rather like decorations. Surprisingly, it smells like the woods. There are sticks on the floor that are lined up in blocks, covered with moss and deerskins, and when you lay back on the bedding, it's pleasingly comfortable. I glance out of the cave. I knew without the Bigfoot's help, there was no way I'd be able to walk down these rocky outcrops, as they're so sheer. When I glance out of the cave, I can see the red-headed Bigfoot sitting there on one of the rocks further away, with his overlong, powerful legs dangling over a rocky ledge. It's like he's laid claim on me, and is waiting for me to be his. He seems determined to get his trophy. For the next 3 days I see him hanging around on that rocky ledge, patiently waiting and waiting and waiting. I knew there was no way I could leave this cave until Bidzul got back, whom I gather was the head of the Bigfoot family. I am informed that he is the most powerful Bigfoot in these parts, respected by all the different Bigfoot clans. And if he puts a special leather necklace around my wrist, all the Bigfoot clans will know that it's from Bidzul and that I belong to him. He's marked me as his own, so they cannot touch me in any way. He is so highly regarded in these parts. If another Bigfoot clan, for example, kills a deer, and Bidzul puts a leather bracelet on the deer, they have to hand it over to him, as everything he marks with a leather thong belongs to him. The Bigfoot family were very kind to me. I ate roots, berries, apples and nuts with the Bigfoots. They offered me some of their meat. I didn't want to eat anything raw, so the Bigfoot female, understanding my dilemma, made a fire especially for me. She rubbed 2 sticks together so effortlessly, and the fire was made. I could cook my own venison. She told me sometimes they cook their meat, especially in winter when it's cold. They collected water from the stream, using old Coca-Cola bottles that were made from glass. I noticed that there were always bottles available in the cave, full of water, which I would drink. The Bigfoot family taking care of me leave the cave at will, to hunt, explore, to play, or forage for food. They all wear a personally designed Bidzul leather bracelet on their wrists, made especially for them, which means that the red-haired Bigfoot or any other Bigfoots can never attack them. Outside the cave entrance is a long leather creation that rather reminds me of a dream catcher. There are eagle feathers attached to it, and it's very attractive. I fancy it for myself, actually. I'd hang it on my bedroom wall. I gather it's known as a natsalid, which means a rainbow seal of protection. What this intrinsically means is that no other Bigfoot can gain entry into the cave, unless they're wearing a Bidzul leather bracelet. I guess the red-headed Bigfoot really didn't think Bidzul would be interested in marking me as his own, but he underestimated the kindness and generous compassion of this Bigfoot family, who have taken me cordially under their wings. I was to learn that there are different clans of Bigfoots, often at loggerheads with each other. There are often fights against rival groups, but no one ever dares take on Bidzul. I asked where he'd gone. They said he was scouting other territory, looking for warmer locations for winter. They often move around, as they're like nomads. The Bigfoot female told me that Bidzul means strong. I gather her name is Lamontsi, which means pretty flower. The son that rescued me was called Kitlali, which means star. The daughter was called Bahita, which means eagle child. The young Bigfoots played games with me on the cave floor. I played with them using a thin stick to hit an acorn. The object was to aim the acorn into a little goalpost that's made out of sticks. The game is called Omancy, and it was not easy. Naturally, I was worried about returning home, as that ghastly red-headed Bigfoot was hell-bent on claiming me as his own. He was hanging around the area like an obnoxious bad smell. I was thrilled when Bitzel finally returned home, with a massive deer flung over his shoulders. He was enormous, 1,000 pounds easily or more, and 10 foot tall. No one in their right mind would ever challenge a creature as titanic as him. He is Herculean in size, built like an army tank. When he entered the cave, he was rather bewildered to see me sitting there playing with Sitali and Bahita, his 2 beloved children, whom I had grown very fond with over the last 3 days. It's then that Lamotzi, the female Bigfoot, begins to talk to him earnestly, backwards and forwards, in a deep, compelling conversation. I know I'm being discussed at great length. Bitzel is the most lofty, majestic, powerful and awesome Bigfoot. So human-looking, rather reminding me of a noble Indian chief. I could easily envisage him wearing one of those Indian headdresses made of eagle's feathers. He looks at me and says to me telepathically, "You will be safe. I will mark you as my own. No one can claim you." He measures my wrist with his hands, prepares me a leather bracelet, the one I'm wearing now. Bitzel throws me over his shoulders. The other Bigfoot seem so sad to see me go. They pat me on the back. I hear them saying in my head, "We will miss you." Tears spring up in my eyes, for I know I will miss them too. Bitzel carries me down the rock face with such grace. The auburn Bigfoot's face glances directly at my hands, which I'm waving for him to see. "Look! I've got one of Bitzel's bracelets!" His face becomes downcast when he sees I'm wearing a Bitzel leather bracelet. He ambles away solemnly, knowing that I now belong to Bitzel, and there's nothing he can do about it. I think he's gutted. Bitzel takes me back to the forest and says to me in my head, "Godspeed, my child. May God be with you." I thanked him for what he'd done. He nodded and glided away. So here I am, back to Victoria. As you can imagine, Layla's story intrigued me. I believed every word of it. The leather bracelet she was wearing on her wrist from Bitzel was actually rather attractive. I fancied one for myself. Layla decided to tell the police that she had no memory of what had happened to her in the woods, and where she'd been. So for us, life returned to normal again. If I have any advice for mothers embarking on raising a baby, please take my mother-in-law's sagacious advice. Be around for your baby on those first few impressionable years, for they grow up far too fast. You would have missed out on so much. I'm so glad I listened to Maggie. There's no question that she was right about that. But I will say this, if you can afford to get help, it'll be a good idea for you, as being a mother is exhausting work. So there you are. That's my story.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners.
"Hurry up," says my brother Joel. "If you're going to take this job seriously, then I suggest you quit dawdling."
"All right," I say. "Give me a moment." I throw on my warm jacket and gloves. It's freezing out there, still dark with the silvery moon casting its ethereal shadows over the grey slate roof of our farmhouse. The piercing chill stabs me through my clothes. It's difficult to get up this early. In truth, it makes no sense to me at all. Secretly, I do feel rather niffed, but I cannot really protest to my older brother, who's 10 years my senior, for he has cordially, very kindly taken me under his wing as an apprentice journalist, a favoured opportunity my father keeps reminding me is not to be sneezed at. Of course, I know he's absolutely right, but some of the things my brother does really irk me, like getting up at this God-forsaken time in the morning, which at best I think is unreasonable, and at worst irrationally nonsensical. In our part of the world, everybody is sagaciously fast asleep. Even the birds have wisely not embraced the morning dawn chorus, but then of course that would be unlikely to be the case at 4:30 in the morning. I open my brother's SUV door.
throwing myself gratefully onto the comfortable white leather seats. I closed the door behind me, feeling the immediate surge of relief of being cocooned from the bracing icy elements outside. Even so, the car is freezing, because it's been parked outside the garage all night. I'm chilled to the marrow. I pull my safety belt over my shoulders, quickly slotting it into the orange holder. I sit back in the car, waiting patiently for my brother, rubbing my numb hands in my gloves together to boost the circulation. My brother is using his scraper to scrape some of the ice off the windscreen. Then he climbs back into the car, revving up the engine. We sit and wait. He ingeniously permits the interior warmth of the car and the efficient wipers to defrost the rest of the ice on our windscreen. Finally, once we can see through the windscreen, the truck rolls smoothly down our long drive of my parents' farmhouse outside of Portland, while we listen to Radio 107, The Eagle, which plays all the classic hits. I bite my lip, restraining myself from saying anything that I might just regret. But once we're on the asphalt road, I feel so annoyed with my brother that the words come galloping out of my mouth like an unbridled horse, not restrained. I'm sorry, Joel. You may be a journalist, but getting me up at 4:30 is ridiculous.
You don't know anything about being a journalist, sis. It's all about being first on a story. It's every journalist's desire to get that big break. If you snooze, you lose. I'm sure you've heard that before.
I get it, Joel, I do, but 4:30 in the morning, it's insane. I mean, anyone we interview will be fast asleep, for goodness sake.
My brother shakes his head warily. You've got a lot to learn, sis. But our first port of call this morning is to pick up a coffee and a donut from my favourite all-night coffee place. You'll feel a lot better after we've had some caffeine in our systems.
I hadn't conceived that one part of the job of being a journalist that I rarely loathed was all the waiting and hanging around, in order to get that quintessential opportunity to interview someone who may look on you as part of a mercenary, dishonourable pack of wolves, literally hurling abuse at you. I can't blame them either, as recently watching how ruthlessly exploitative journalists behave in order to get a good story rather reminds me of a bunch of devious vouchers, hungrily descending on a dead carcass, beating each other off to get the best scraps of meat. Others employ more unscrupulous, scandalous methods of manipulating people to their advantage, by guilefully turning on the charm, in the hope that their seductively flattering words might get them that exclusive. My brother finally drives his car into a 24-hour service station, returning with some coffees and donuts. We sit in the car together and drink our coffees. Mine is so hot I have to blow on it to cool it down. But my brother's absolutely right. The caffeine does the trick, as do the sickly sweet donuts, that frankly are a little sickly so early in the morning. But now I do feel wide-eyed and bushy-tailed. So what's our story today? I ask. My brother scans through his cell phone updates.
It's around here. I gather it happened at about 8 o'clock last night. A young woman of 22 years old. That's your age, isn't it? Well, she shot herself in the chest. I gather the gunshot woke her parents up. They found her lying in the barn. She had attempted suicide. Now she's fighting for her life in the hospital. Sadly, there's been a spate of suicides among young people recently. I was hoping we could get to interview the mother. We need to find out why her daughter tried to take her life. This is potentially a very good story. That is, of course, if we can get the mother to agree to talk to us. It would seem attempted suicide is on the increase. It's a current, trendy, hot topic of late that is getting a lot of publicity. My brother puts on his GPS. We drive past high embankments of trees, a few meadows, and take a familiar turning down a dirt road, which gives me a sense of déjà vu, as if I've been here before. He then parks outside this large, symmetrical colonial farmhouse. I freeze on the spot, staring vacantly at the house, not being able to get my head around what I'm seeing. "What's wrong, sis?" my brother asks me. "You look as if you've seen a ghost."
I'm trembling. "Are you sure this is the correct address?" I ask, sounding almost faint.
What the hell is the matter, sis? You've gone so white. I don't understand it.
My brother has absolutely no idea. He's clueless. He doesn't realise that I know this farmhouse exceedingly well, like the back of my hand. For with my photographic memory, I can see every detail of the grandiose interiors, from the bright red Aga in the kitchen that they imported all the way from England, to the large rustic French kitchen cabinets. I also remember the stunning limestone floors, the high ornate ceilings, the arched doorways, the large, incredibly spectacular windows, overlooking transfixing views of the viridescent countryside. My mind navigates itself right back to a more innocent time, where I engage with the wistful, nostalgic memories of my early childhood, where I can see me and Paisley swinging on the swing set outside, playing together jubilantly. I remember cooking cookies in the kitchen, getting chocolate splattered all over the floor and all over the white cat, so that he became brown. We turned the kitchen into a bomb site. Paisley's mother began chasing out the chocolate cat from her home, when she suddenly realised that it was her own cat Purdy that she was shooing away. I remember playing with Paisley's beautiful doll's house. My brother is looking at me with wide, earnest eyes.
My God, I don't believe it. You know who lives here, don't you?
I can hear the rising excitement in his voice. A lonely tear spills down my cheeks like a raindrop. I nod. Paisley was my best friend until I was 12 years old. I take a large gulp. I thought we would remain besties for the rest of our lives. But everything changed after we went to different schools, I say regretfully. After that we would just nod to each other in passing. It was like we drifted away from each other, like two lonely logs on a river being swept away on different courses, or journeys if you like. I really miss her, you know, Joel. But I didn't do anything to rekindle that friendship. I regret that now. You know, with all the social media these days, I can't remember the number of times I've wanted to get in touch with her, but I always felt too hung up with guilt. I'm amazed to see 2 other journalists parked outside the farmhouse now, waiting to get a big scoop. I imagine on the story.
I have no idea, sis. But this is going to be your opportunity to shine. You're exclusive. Don't you see, Paisley's mother is unlikely to turn you away in the circumstances, as she knows you. You could get an interview with her, and for a trainee journalist, that almost never happens. You're one very lucky girl. This could be the shooting star that propels you on the ladder of your career as an aspiring journalist.
Madeline Bennett's story, Paisley's mother. I climb out of my bed. My head is throbbing violently. I feel as if I've got a headache coming on. I amble over to my bedroom window. I was certain I heard car tyres skidding over my granular driveway, and also the sound of an engine being switched off. I peer surreptitiously through my curtains. They twitch. I'm shocked and appalled to see a number of cars parked in my driveway, with human silhouettes all seated patiently in the front seats. For a moment I'm rather perplexed and puzzled, and then with a flash of revelation, I realise who they are. Of course, I might have guessed. They're journalists, I think, breathing heavily. They're waiting to pounce on me, to get a scoop on my daughter's attempted suicide. It makes me sick to my stomach. I feel quite nauseous. I mean, how depraved do you have to be to want to make money out of somebody else's misery? How dare they invade my personal space like this, like a frenzied pool of hungry piranhas? I trudge down my sweeping staircase towards the kitchen. I feel weighted down by the surreal events of the previous evening. The resounding sound of that gunshot going off at 8 o'clock at night. It makes me jump out of my skin again, as the memory stirs me up, jolting me to my senses, as my eyes begin to moisten with tears. I had jumped out of my bed faster than a jackrabbit, racing down the staircase at an unfathomable speed. My legs had almost become airborne, my heart beating a dime to a dozen. It was clenched so tightly, with a rising level of trepidation. I was petrified of what I would find. Please no, Paisley, please no. Please don't tell me you've done this. I stand in the doorway of my barn. For a moment I feel removed from myself. almost as if I'm playing an obscure, ambiguous, indeterminate role in a movie, for none of this feels real. It's like the body of the girl in a nightdress, her chest spattered with droplets of crimson blood, is just a doll on a movie set. For a brief second, I stare vacantly at my own daughter, barely recognizing her, or even comprehending that it is my daughter. And then suddenly reality seizes my attention. I spring quickly into action, like a clockwork clown. I dial 911. The kind woman on the phone is instructing me to take deep breaths, to calm down. The emergency services were here so fast, but the rest of the night seems to have gone by like a blurred dream, of which everything is hazy, shrouded and cloaked by a sense of disbelief that has clandestinely eclipsed much of my memory. I do remember people asking me if I was all right. They were placing cups of sweet tea into my hands. The shock overwhelmed me, until the surgeon had come out of surgery, with a big smile on his face.
"Hello, Mrs. Bennet. I'm Dr. Theo Morgan. Delighted to meet you. I've got excellent news for you. The surgery went like a dream. I couldn't have asked for it to go better. The self-inflicted bullet wound missed all her major organs by a hair's breadth. We're very, very lucky. Of course, she did lose a substantial amount of blood, which we replaced. But the good news is she's going to be fine."
"When can I see her? Can I see her now?"
"Maybe tomorrow, at lunchtime, Mrs. Bennet. You look as if you're wearing the weight of the world on your shoulders, and understandably so. But my advice is for you to go home now, and to have a good night's sleep. Your daughter is going to make a full recovery. She's out of danger. You can rest assured she's in excellent hands. But you won't be any good to her yourself if you're too exhausted. So go home and have a good night's sleep. The best thing you can do for your daughter is just that."
The doctor had been right. The events of the night had drained me so much that the moment I hit the pillow, I was out like a light. So was my husband, lost in the world of our dreams. That moment is suspended in a cushion of relief. How I wish I hadn't woken up, because while I was asleep, my dreams suspended me in a cushion of comfort that suppressed some of the horrors of the previous night, until I'd opened my eyes, that is, reliving the haunting events of the daunting, inauspicious night that came hurtling through my mind like a steam train on full throttle, reminding me of everything that had happened. The big question, of course, is why? Of course I knew the answer to the question. I busied myself by putting a kettle on the hob of my red aga, cradling my body against the cosy warmth of the oil-fired oven. Then I heard the doorbell going. I know it's the journalists. They won't go away. I'm going to tell them to buzz off my property now. And that is what I do, marching defiantly to the door and opening it up. Several faces are peering at me.
"Mrs. Bennet, condolences to you for what happened last night. Can we talk to you for a moment?"
"I'm sorry," I say, raising my hands. "I'd like you to go. I won't be talking to anyone." One brazen man says,
"Mrs. Bennet, why do you think your daughter tried to commit suicide? Was your daughter depressed?"
"Mrs. Bennet, do you know why there's an increased rate in young suicides?"
"Mrs. Bennet, what was going on in your daughter's head?"
No comment, I say. I'm about to shut the door when I hear a familiar voice. "Mrs. Bennet, it's Chloe Walker. Do you remember me? I was best friends with Paisley. Please may I come in for a chat?" I glance up at Chloe. She had been my daughter's best friend in her earlier life. And then, like all Paisley's friends, she had abandoned my daughter. For a moment I hesitate. Then I let Chloe in. I can hear the rest of the cars driving away. My relief is immense. "You're not one of them?" I ask. Chloe looks at me and shrugs. "I'm hoping to become a journalist," she admits. "Honestly, but this part of descending on people like a bunch of vouchers, it disturbs me greatly. I don't think I can do that." "I can imagine. It can't be easy." Back to Chloe. I had not seen Mrs. Bennet for over 10 years. She's a woman in her early 50s now. She looks remarkably good for her age, with a flawless peachy skin. And her hair, well, it's chestnut in colour, is very elegantly styled, with sharp edges that actually look very sophisticated, hanging like luxurious silk curtains above her shoulders. But I can see that she looks fatigued and exhausted. The weight of the world is clearly hanging heavily on her shoulders. But can you blame her? I certainly can't. Look, I said, you've had an awful, dreadful shock. I can't imagine what you've been through. You sit down. I'll get the tea started. She seems almost grateful. She allows herself to fall back on a high chair on the large kitchen island. I fuss around the old Aga, preparing her a cup of tea. And even though I haven't been in this kitchen for 10 years, I remember exactly where everything is. I sit down opposite Mrs. Bennet, handing her a piping hot cup of tea and a couple of pieces of toast and honey. I'm really sorry, I said, about what happened to you last night. I can't imagine what you've been through. I squeezed her hand tightly. The good news, Mrs. Bennet, is she's going to make a full recovery. That's not what I'm concerned about, she says to me, looking at me through eyes that are misting over with tears. I think Paisley is very depressed. She feels everyone she ever cares about leaves her or betrays her. Mrs. Bennet looks at me pointedly. There was you, her very best friend in the entire world. Paisley said the moment you went to your new school, whenever you saw her, you would just nod to her, as if she was an acquaintance that you barely knew. You did not even want to acknowledge her any more. You never bothered to phone her or anything. She was devastated about that. It really wasn't like that, Mrs. Bennet. In truth, I really miss Paisley. I've never had a friend like your daughter. I guess after we went to different schools, we were swept away down different currents. I know that's no excuse, but I guess you're hanging around a new group of friends all the time. You get caught up with them, whisked away from your old life. And then there's the extracurricular activities, the parties. You're mixing with a brand new bunch of people. You get ensnared in a whole new life, and that can block away your past with its continuous distractions. Before you know it, your best friend becomes almost a stranger. The truth is, I wanted to resume my friendship with Paisley. I really did. But I didn't have the balls. There was a part of me that believed she'd found a brand new life for herself, with new friends. Why would she be interested in a blast from the past, so to speak? Mrs. Bennet looks at me through compassionate eyes. Oh, what a tangled web we weave. I think I understand what you're saying, but Paisley didn't take your absence from her life very well. Anyway, leaving that all aside, I think it was this last month when things spiralled out of control for Paisley, she says reflectively. She pauses for a moment, taking a long sip of tea. I think me and my husband started the ball rolling. We are still together, sharing the same bed, but after 25 years of marriage, we have been discussing the possibility of splitting up for good and getting divorced. Paisley isn't taking this well. It's certainly not easy for any daughter or son, irrespective of their age, to accept the fact that their parents want to call their relationship to a halt, especially when they've been together for so long. I'm so sorry to hear that. I hope this is not impertinent of me to ask, but why do you want to get divorced? Mrs. Bennet looks at me pensively. We're still very good friends, you know. It'll be an amicable divorce. It was just one day we decided we were completely bored with each other. We wanted different things in life. So unfortunately Paisley's father is thinking of moving on to Hawaii. Paisley is not thrilled about the idea, especially when the quickest flight to Hawaii will be 9 hours. But some airlines, with a stopover destination which includes lots of waiting around, can take as long as 36 hours, which is very discouraging. Then on top of all that, Paisley's best friend Georgie emigrated to Australia 2 weeks ago. Then her boyfriend of 5 years, who she considered the man of her dreams, cheated on her. She discovered him in the woodgrove kissing her close friend, so she feels as if all her friends leave her and betray her. It just got to her. She kept saying to me that she felt so miserable, so incredibly depressed, that she wanted to kill herself. Naturally, I was exceedingly worried about Paisley's mental health, but a good friend of mine told me that most suicidal people don't tell people they're intending to kill themselves. They furtively plan their suicides in secret, you see. You have to actually look for the signs. But if a person talks about taking their own lives, she told me it was something I needn't worry about then. She told me that Paisley was just venting her internal turmoil, her disenchantment and disillusionment with life. Suffice to say, I thought she'd never do something silly like that. Ostensibly, I should never have listened to that misguided advice. I should have got help for her immediately, sent her to a psychologist to get antidepressants. But I assured myself it was just a blip on the landscape, that Paisley would soon get over it. I kept reassuring her that while life can be tough, it's rather like the weather. You have good cycles and bad, but you need to ride the storms in life, like a surfer on the ocean waves, as the bad stuff always passes. I mean, when the weather is bad, you can have heavy winds, thick snow, chaos all at once. I tried to explain that to her, that sometimes bad things happen in clusters, and then they go away. They pass. Did Paisley talk about taking her life often, I asked. No, it was only after she discovered her boyfriend in the woodgrove passionately kissing her friend that she said she just couldn't take it anymore. She didn't want to live. She said to me, "Don't worry, Mum. I'm far too vain to blow my brains out. Besides, it will make a hell of a mess for you. I'll do it neatly for you, through the heart." But thank God she missed. Well, she wasn't very good at biology, was she? She possibly didn't know the exact location of the heart, I tease. It's very good to see you after all these years again, Chloe. Can I ask you a big favour? Of course. I'd like you to be the first person to go and visit Paisley. She could really do with a friend right now. If she knows you're interested in resuming your friendship with her. She pauses for a moment, looking concerned. I'm not being presumptuous, am I? You do want to be her friend. I take Mrs. Bennet's hand in mine. I'd love nothing better than to resume my friendship with Paisley. I've never had a friendship like hers. Oh dear, I'm thrilled to hear that, says Mrs. Bennet, giving me an effusive hug. I think your re-emergence in her life, Chloe, will be far more successful than a plethora of antidepressants or psychologists. I was surprised to find my friend Paisley in a normal but private ward. I arrived at visiting time with a huge bouquet of flowers, a large box of chocolates and a hot air balloon shaped like Mickey Mouse, saying "Get well soon." I was feeling nervous, but I knew she'd miss me as much as I'd missed her over the years. So it gave me that confident edge, as all my life I feared rejection. "She's fast asleep," said the nurse, whispering to me. "I tell you what, I'll get you a vase for the flowers, shall I? I'm sure she'll wake up any time soon. But after a gunshot, the patient needs lots of recovery time. But she is going to be fine. Physically, yes, but when someone's tried to take their own life, it's a big wake-up call. She's going to need emotional support." I move towards the bedside chair, sitting beside my friend. I can see layers of thick, glossy chestnut hair, like her mother's, tossed over the pillow. Slowly but surely, Paisley opens one blue eye, and then another. For a moment she stares at me, with wonderment, as if she isn't entirely sure it's me. She thinks she's dreaming. I watch her shutting her eyes again. Then she opens them very slowly. "Chloe," she says, "is that you? Or am I dreaming?" "It's me," I said, taking her hand in mine and giving it a tight squeeze. She sits up against the pillows and retches with pain. "Ouch!" "Does it hurt?" I ask her. "A little," she said. "Why, Chloe? Why would you shoot yourself like this? It's crazy. You've got so much to live for." I watch her eyes filling with tears. Everyone I love abandons me, leaves me, or betrays me. I just couldn't take it any longer. It just got too much. "I'm so sorry about us, Paisley. I'm sure among the people you think abandoned you, I must come to the top of that list. The truth is, you've always been in my heart. Nothing can ever erase that. You were my very best friend in the entire world. If you will have me again, I would love to continue our friendship where we left off when we were 12. I always wanted to contact you, on the social media I mean, but I was so scared of rejection, afraid that you'd found brand new friends, and had no place for me in your life." "I felt exactly the same way," said Paisley. "You're the best friend I ever had. I wanted to get in touch with you, but I thought you might think you'd outgrown me. I was so afraid of being cast aside. You looked so busy with your new life. I didn't think you had any space for an old friend like me. What are we both like? We're ridiculous. Do you know what? It reminds me of that song we used to sing as kids. Do you remember? I think it goes like this. Make new friends, keep the old. One is silver, the other gold. A circle's round, it has no end. That's how long I want to be your friend. Yes, I remember we used to sing that song. I feel exactly the same way about you, Paisley. Just like that song. Nothing is more precious than an old friendship. I want you to promise me that you'll never try to kill yourself again. I'm just jolly glad you were so dreadfully bad at biology. You possibly don't even know where your heart is. Paisley chuckles. That's true. I was horrendous at biology, and also far too vain to shoot myself in the head. The idea of leaving that mess behind was all-consuming. Paisley sits up on her bed and looks at me excitedly. I've got something so amazing to tell you that happened to me. I've been looking for someone to tell, someone special. Have you ever had a day when the most wonderful thing happened to you and the most dreadful thing at the same time? So part of you is filled with joy and another part of you is ravaged and devastated, like when it rains and the sun shines at the same time, almost as if the weather's confused, rather like a mixed bag of goodies, I suppose. Well, what happened? I'll tell you the story from start to finish, shall I? Please do. Paisley's account. I was in an exceedingly bad place in my life, as you know. One of my closest friends had emigrated to Australia, and although I could speak to her every day, with the different time zones, it became increasingly difficult. Then my parents promptly decided that they were seriously thinking of a trial separation or getting divorced. They announced this to me with such a nonchalant attitude, almost as if they were telling me we were having blueberry pancakes for breakfast. It was exceedingly bizarre. I hadn't seen this coming. My parents never fought a day in their lives. They were a solid wall of security in my life that suddenly came crumbling down before my very eyes, without any red flags or warning bells, so to speak, to prepare me for this fortuitous tsunami. I asked them why they were thinking of leaving each other. My mother told me because they were frankly bored as hell with each other. I tried to reason with them, speak common sense to them, telling them that they are responsible for their own happiness and for making their lives exciting and adventurous. If they're bored or jaded, then it's because they're not making a conscious effort with their relationship. They should start dating all over again, going out to dinner more, maybe even sometimes having a brief sabbatical from each other, where one goes away on a bridge holiday for 3 weeks, the other to Italy for a cooking course, so that they can appreciate each other when they come back. So they're meditating on my sagacious advice. Then, if that wasn't bad enough for me, I began to notice my boyfriend's aloof, impassive and standoffish behaviour was becoming increasingly disengaged, detached and rather remote towards me. I observed he hardly ever popped around to visit me any more. He always came up with 101 excuses as to why he couldn't visit me. "I've got to work late tonight. The boss is forcing us to work very late. I'm having dinner with the parents. I can't let Mum down." One day I discovered a woman's diamante earring and a lipstick in his car that didn't belong to me. I smelt a rat. I think you can have a sixth sense when someone is cheating on you. I asked him, "Who do these belong to?" "Oh, that belongs to a colleague from work. She needed a lift the other night. Being a gentleman, I volunteered to drop her off home. I think she must have dropped the earring and the lipstick in the car." I could tell he was lying. His expression was shifty, his words spoken far too fast. His brown eyes avoided my gaze. I decided to give him the benefit of the doubt, but this heavy oppressive feeling hung over me, almost as if I was carrying a weighty bag of books with me wherever I went. One late afternoon, after a tough day in the office, when I had an altercation with my boss, I felt so fatigued and jaded, weary from the whole day. We couldn't agree on the colours for a customer's poolside retreat. The day was drawing to a close, while the evening waited patiently in the wings. I adore wildlife, so I thoroughly enjoy taking the long way home. It's a little bit like experiencing an adventurous game drive. It's the little things in life that make life richer. That's when I see my boyfriend's truck, parked outside one of the more remote hiking trails. At first, I'm nonplussed, not knowing exactly what to think. What is his truck doing parked in a large clearing outside a wood grove at this uncharacteristic time of the day? Maybe he needed to take a leisurely stroll after a saliently difficult day in the office. I know he personally loves this trail. He's always been a great rambler. Or could his unorthodox reasons for being here be infinitely more nefarious, I wonder? The contingent likelihood that he could be entertaining a woman in the woodgrove for an early evening picnic flickers through my mind, like the bright red flashing warning lights of an emergency vehicle, alerting me to this horrifying reality. After all, he'd brought me to this woodgrove on romantic evening picnics before, so if he was cheating on me, there was a very high probability he would bring his new lover here. I'm now fired up with curiosity, a rising level of solicitous apprehension. I have to find out exactly what's going on. Fortunately, I find my trainers and walking gear in the back trunk of my car. I hastily open the trunk, slipping on a pair of jogging pants that I find bunched up in a duffel bag, along with my sneakers. So I slip off my court shoes and put on my sneakers, and I find a torch which I take along with me as well. I walk towards the woodgrove, my heart thundering in my chest violently, my nervous anxiety twitching through my body like dozens of little electric shocks. I discern the sky above me is marvelled in a mottled grey colour. The disc-shaped yellow sun is dipping over the horizon, embracing the sky warmly, with splashes of yellows, bright tangerines, pinks and oranges. It's exceedingly transfixing. I walk away from this granular clearing, up a slight embankment, down the dark, fertile earthen trail of the woodgrove, which is made up of big-leaf maples, ponderosa pines, black cottonwoods and Douglas firs, that stand up proud and tall, like vertical masterful giants, resplendently adorned in opulent viridescent finery. In the late afternoon the forest is darker, but soft shades of this orange light dance through the canopy, bespeckling the floor in disco-like balls of moving colour, that caress the ferns, wild flowers, shrubs, variegated creepers and sumptuous verdant mosses. So as I walk on the ground, it feels soft under my feet. I drink in the fresh, crisp smell of the air that is so richly anointed with the smell of wild flowers, the earthen floor, mosses, pine, along with the buttery sweet notes of the ponderosa pine trees. I can still hear the pretty tinkering of bird song. It's so magnificently beautiful in this woodland sanctuary that for a brief moment I forget all about my troubles and about my boyfriend, as my senses are completely infused with the wondrous, captivating marvels of nature that absorb my attention with a reverent allure, rather like a ravenous sea sponge. All of a sudden, I stop dead in my tracks. I simply can't believe what I'm beholding. I discern this dark, ambiguous silhouette peering through the branches assiduously, engaged in watching something rather riveting that has clearly solicited his scrutiny. I stop. I become as still as a tree, gawking in astonishment. I can't imagine what this creature is, for it's not shaped like a bear, but it's distinctly humanoid, with a pencil-straight back, strong, powerful, brawny proportions, accentuated by distinctly pronounced muscles. He has prodigious legs, substantial in both size and strength. I might know what this is, I think. Could it possibly be a Bigfoot? My heart pounds with excitement at this prospect. I don't believe I'm noisy in my stealthful approach across the dark, black, fertile floor, as I wasn't compelled to draw attention to myself, for in this poignant moment fear had not entwined my thoughts, for my fascination had distracted those immediate instincts that would propel me to run away in normal circumstances. This anomalous, daunting creature, that I suspect might just be a Bigfoot, senses my presence. A distinctive, pointed, pyramid-shaped head swivels round in my direction to look at me. My eyes meet his. I lock into his stare. This creature has the most exquisite eyes that I've ever beheld, the colour of a tiger's eye stone. His eyes twinkle with a humorous affection, a benevolent warmth, for his intimidating size is of little consequence to me, for the creature just oozes charm like trickling warm honey over a piece of toast. I'm filled with an all-knowing comprehension that this creature, which is definitely a Bigfoot, is as cuddly and congenial as a teddy bear. But he has a noble, distinguished look to his human-like face that rather reminds me of a stoic Indian warrior. He possesses prominent high cheekbones, a perfectly chiselled square masculine jawline. The creature turns around to re-engage in his former focus, as if he is watching a movie through the branches of the trees. To my amazement, he begins to mime. Of course, I didn't realize what he was exactly doing at the time. He puckers up his lips and acts like he's smooching someone. Then he oscillates his overlong arms in a long, sweeping motion, as if he's running his arms up and down a long back. Then he acts like he's eating something rather delicate, popping it into the back of his mouth and chewing it rather seductively. And then he sips something, as though he's drinking a glass of something very fine, possibly a fizzy glass of champagne. His imitations or reenactments are hilariously funny. He's a natural comedian. I start giggling. I can't help myself. The creature's hilarious. I'm enthralled. The creature is delighted by my reaction. So he needs little encouragement and continues miming, with sweeping, effusive gestures, tender smooching, caressing movements. The Bigfoot is using his overlong arms, gesturing to me. He's pointing to the gap in the trees, as if to say, "Come and see what I'm looking at." I unhesitantly walk up to his side, pulling a few leaves away on the lower elevation, as I'm significantly shorter than this gargantuan creature. I peer through the lower branches to see what he's been miming, and that is when I see my boyfriend. He's smooching my close friend. I almost forget about the Bigfoot. I move swiftly away from the tree, storming through the undergrowth angrily, towards the two people lying on the picnic blanket, gazing adoringly into each other's eyes. "Now, isn't this very nice and cosy? So what's going on here?" Daniel looks up at me, his face colouring a bright crimson.
What are you doing here, Paisley?"
"More to the point, I'd like to know what you're doing here," I say, eyeing the chocolate-dipped strawberries and champagne, the delectable picnic spread lying across the tartan rug on the ground, that looks like my boyfriend has gone to the nines to prepare a sumptuous feast for my friend. I see gammon ham on plates, coronation chicken, potato salad, tuna niçoise, French bread. Daniel follows my gaze as my eyes rest on the fizzy bottle of champagne and the chocolate-dipped strawberries. His face washes over in a tidal wave of trepidation.
It's not what you think,"
he says very fast, as if frantically searching for a reasonable excuse to explain away his cosy little tete-a-tete with my very good friend. He's going to have a job explaining this.
"We were just discussing what we're going to do for your upcoming birthday party."
He's trying hard to pull the wool over my eyes, but I'm not easily fleeced.
"Stop lying to me, Daniel. I saw the two of you kissing.
And as for you, Chanel, I thought we were good friends. How could you betray me like this? I can't believe it." "It means nothing," said Chanel, her face also going crimson with embarrassment. She fails to look at me in my eyes. I was just having fun with Daniel. It's nothing serious, I promise. Please, Paisley, don't be mad. You're my best friend. I don't want to lose our friendship. Your boyfriend, he doesn't mean anything to me, I promise." "I'm your friend," I scoff. "Really, Chanel? You consider me a friend? Is that right? Now let me see. That's exceedingly informative. If this is the contempt in which you treat your friends, I'd love to see how you treat your enemies." "Oh, don't be like that," said Chanel. "Don't be like what, Chanel? Don't be upset as you viciously stab me in the back with so much contempt like this." "No, I won't get upset, Chanel, and I'll tell you why. Because people like you, with the insouciant value system of a gnat, the heedless emotional intelligence of a bluebottle fly, the prideful heart of a black widow spider, are worth 2 a penny, a dime a dozen. You know why? 'Cause they cheapen and devalue every single thing they touch, like you have done with our friendship. You both are pathetic. Frankly, you deserve each other. Enjoy your picnic. The champagne and the chocolate-dipped strawberries as well. And you know what? I hope you choke on them."
"Please, Paisley, don't be like this. Let's talk. You can't just throw our relationship away, as if it means nothing. says Daniel earnestly. I mean, we've been together for 5 years. You can't drop me like this. Can't I just? I think you'll find you did a good job of that yourself, Daniel. You take care of the things you value, don't you? Not treat them with such opprobrium. It's over between us, I say, my eyes misting over with tears, and I begin to walk away. But Paisley, it's you I love. Chanel means nothing to me, nothing at all. It was only a bit of silly fun. But you, Paisley, you're the jewel in my crown. I ignore Daniel. I walk away, filled with a stinging anger and an aching, throbbing pain, as if someone has stabbed me with a sharp knife thousands of times over. To my surprise, the Bigfoot that has been hiding behind the trees, imitating the two lovers, begins to follow me. He looks at me through his wide, beautiful brown, deep-set eyes that brim with a silvery pool of compassion. For a second I hear a voice in my head saying, "Please, don't be sad. You're a beautiful soul." I realize the creature has spoken to me telepathically. This has never happened to me before. I'm gobsmacked. I hear his words again. "Please, please don't be sad." The creature glides with me side by side. I'm ever grateful for his companionship. His kind eyes soothe my sorrowful heart. I retreat from the forest down the embankment towards the clearing where my car is parked, with the Bigfoot anchored by my side, his presence holding up my flagging heart. He pats me on the back reassuringly. I climb into my vehicle. I don't want to leave this kindly soul behind, but I have to get away from those two guileful human monsters in the woods that have broken my heart. That's what I need to escape from. The Bigfoot is clearly concerned about me, as he runs on the side of my vehicle on the sandy road for a few minutes, looking in at me. "Don't do anything silly," he says in my head, almost as if he predicts what I ultimately will be driven to do. Then he stops in the middle of the road and watches me drive away. When I got home, I received an SMS from Daniel saying, "Don't think we were fooled. You obviously hid your car away. We knew you were the one throwing pebbles at us. That was a cheap, childish stunt to pull. But despite everything, I love you. We need to talk." Despite everything, I think to myself, despite a few pebbles being flung at you, you're willing to talk. How very decent of you, Daniel. It's in this brief moment I realise that the Bigfoot must have been throwing pebbles at the people that had hurt me. And I feel warmed that the Bigfoot had been sticking up for me, but I knew he would never have hurt Chanel or Daniel, because he had an incredibly good heart. Of course I went home and was desperately upset, and a day or so later I just couldn't take all the betrayal anymore. I grabbed the rifle, and the rest is history. I guess I just wasn't thinking. "I know," I said, squeezing my friend's hands. "Sometimes in the heat of the moment, when things build up, we can do things we regret. I'm just thankful that you're such a lousy shot. But boy, what an incredible story you've just told me. It is an incredible story. And I'm glad I'm a lousy shot too," she agrees. To cut a long story short, me and Chanel resumed the friendship we had as children. And truly, those old friendships are like gold. They're worth salvaging. They really are. So there you are. That's my story.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, my name is Meryl, and my Bigfoot encounter happened in 2008, when I was about 32 years old at the time. My story starts when I began dating a young Portuguese man called Pedro, whom my parents totally despised. Coming from a strict Catholic home with a very protective father, I just assumed that no one would ever be good enough for their daughter as far as my parents were concerned. I did not like him, my mother would say. There's something decidedly shifty about him. My father was not shy in coming forward either, about his own misgivings concerning Pedro. "I really do believe he is not good enough for you, dear," my father would say. "You deserve so much better than him." "What's wrong with him, Dad?" I would challenge him. "I'm not sure," he would say. "I just don't like him." "That's what you have said about every single boy I've ever dated. Has there ever been anyone I dated that you actually liked?" I would say. "Well, when you were 8, there was that cute boy Malcolm, don't you remember?" said my mother. "Such a refined, decent fellow he was.
I wonder what he's doing now." "Mum," I protested, "he was only 8 at the time, so how do you know he would meet with your approval now?" "There are just some things you know, dear," she would say. There was just no way getting through to my parents, who seemed determined to despise my boyfriend Pedro. Pedro was a very good-looking man with a very boyish face, which I found incredibly attractive. He had a warm hazelnut complexion, treacle-coloured brown hair, and very warm brown eyes. He worked as an airline pilot, flying from São Paulo in Brazil to Charleston in West Virginia, which was a flight of about 10 hours and 7 minutes, which meant that I could only spend 3 days a week with him when he was in Charleston, West Virginia. Pedro could speak fluent French, Portuguese and English, and even if I say so myself, he was an absolute charmer, and everywhere we went, women flocked for his syrupy words and beguiling magnetism. One day Pedro proposed to me and asked me to marry him, and this revelation went down like a lead balloon with my parents, whom arrived on my wedding day with faces so downcast and miserable it was unbelievably embarrassing. They looked as if they were attending a funeral service rather than a wedding, and it was ironic that my mother wore a beautiful black dress on that day, which I believe was her silent way of protesting her secret disapproval and dislike of my husband-to-be Pedro. Pedro's parents were both deceased and, according to him, had tragically died when he was only a young boy in a devastating car accident, and so it would seem all our wedding guests were my immediate family and friends, something that both my parents found decidedly odd, and it bothered them a great deal. "Where are all the Portuguese members of Pedro's family?" my father asked with a raised cynical eyebrow and a somewhat perturbed look on his face. "Should they not be here on this celebratory occasion?" "I told you, Dad, they're dead. Pedro doesn't have anyone in the world apart from me," I told him. My father stroked his moustache in an act of deep contemplation and said, "I'm sorry, dear, but I do find this decidedly odd. There are no Portuguese guests at the wedding, no friends of his, nor distant family. I'm very flummoxed by all this," he said. Looking back, my father was absolutely right. There was something odd about the lack of Portuguese people in attendance at my wedding, not to mention people on the airline where he worked. Pedro did put this down to people being too busy to attend, and Brazil being a little bit too far away for people to travel, and I fell for all this pathetic, lame excuses, hook, line and sinker with my whimsical naivety. However, when you've been swept off your feet like I was, you simply refuse to allow those disturbing, nagging thoughts to rob you of the bountiful joy you feel about marrying the man of your dreams, which is what I emphatically believe Pedro to be. He was so handsome and utterly charming, and all my friends thought he was utterly gorgeous, so what was there not to like about being swept off my feet by a knight in shining armour, a tall, dark stranger? Pedro and I bought a quaint little house in the Virginia countryside that I had dreamed about owning since I was a young girl. It all happened when on one weekend in Charleston we decided to take a random, spontaneous family trip into an area of remote West Virginian countryside. It was an off-the-cuff decision to take that drive that my father had unwittingly taken a wrong turning, and we found ourselves on this very large dirt-back road in the middle of nowhere. We glanced in the distance, and I remember my mother saying, "Is that not so incredibly pretty?" She was pointing towards the beautiful rolling green valleys, where nestled within their mist was the prettiest house that I had ever seen in my entire life. I knew in that instant that one of these days I would own that quaint little house. "I'm going to own that house one day, Daddy," I told him, and I'd meant it. So imagine my surprise when Pedro and I decided to purchase our own home, and our estate agent presented us with a list of available country homes for purchase. Imagine my jubilant surprise when I discovered that my quaint little dream house was up for sale. Pedro and I put an offer in on the property immediately, without even viewing the home. All these years later, I still remember the estate agent's aghast expression on her face, but she muttered, "You've not even seen inside the house. How can you be sure you actually want it?" "I've always wanted it," I told her, "since I was 10 years old." The estate agent smiled at me and said, "For the record, this has got to be my fastest sale ever." And so it was that it did not take long to settle down into our beautiful cottage-style home, which was situated on about 30 acres of land, nestled amidst the emerald green valleys like a precious sparkling jewel,
and flanked on the furthest side by vast areas of natural forest that stretched back for miles, some of it that was publicly owned land. The views from the quintessential French cottage windows were breathtakingly beautiful, and truly I was living the dream idyllic life. Granted, there were a few repairs needed around the home, and some general maintenance jobs, as well as much-needed coat of fresh white paint, but on the whole the house was in excellent condition, and it did not take much energy to get it into tip-top shape either. For the first year of my marriage, I busied myself transforming my dream home into the idyllic dream home that I wanted, and even my parents, who visited me regularly, believed that my little house was like a sparkling treasure. "I do envy you, dear," said my mother, "waking up to these exquisite panoramic views every day. It's like you're on holiday every single day of your life," she said, "not to mention all the idyllic wildlife you have here," she said, as she watched in awe as some pretty white-tailed deer scampered into the woods. "I'm a sucker for the beautiful creek over there," said my father. "That place is an absolute treasure. You should get a watchtower erected there so you can watch the animals and birds coming to the water." "How about I build it for you? I do have my ulterior motives, of course, because I'd love to do a spot of bird watching there from time to time myself, if you don't mind." "It's a lovely idea, Dad," I said, hugging him tightly, "and you can come bird watching whenever you want. Go ahead and build that watchtower. You're welcome to do that." Fast forward a couple of years, and things appeared to be going very smoothly in my marriage with Pedro. Even my parents had stopped giving me grief over my husband, having resigned themselves to the fact that he was their son-in-law now, and there was not much they could actually do to change that. Yet I knew in my heart that they never completely warmed to him, nor did they trust him. Credit to them, though, Pedro never ever knew how much my parents disapproved of him, because they always treated him warmly and were very engaging in conversation with him. I did notice that over the last few months Pedro was spending more and more time in Brazil, but he kept assuring me it was all to do with the hectic airline schedules, and I guess I naively chose to believe him. I was working in Charleston 3 days a week at a coffee shop, and I was really enjoying life and making many new friends there. I'd also enrolled in a Portuguese course and was learning the language very secretly. I wanted to surprise Pedro one day by speaking to him in fluent Portuguese, and even my teacher declared me to be an exceedingly fast and keen learner. My father came bird-watching on my property once or twice a week, and he had spotted some very rare and unusual birds on my land, and had succeeded in building a phenomenal watchtower there, which I even used from time to time, as I loved observing the deer coming to the water to drink. They were always so serene and peaceful to watch. Every time Pedro came back from his long flights, he would always appear unusually exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes, and he often seemed irritable, stressed, and very snappy. I was surprised that his flying trips took so much out of him physically. I always encouraged him to relax, unwind, and take a chill pill when he came home, then later to go out into the fresh air and take a brisk walk in the woods, which he invariably always did. One day, as I watched my husband venturing towards the woods for an afternoon stroll, I decided to join him. As I approached the woods, I could hear my husband on his mobile phone, speaking in fluent Portuguese, but in that second I distinctly overheard him say, "I love you, my baby," in Portuguese. I could barely believe what I was hearing. I immediately ran back to my cottage with tears pouring down my cheeks like a deluge of rain. My heart was beating violently in my chest, and I began to feel overwhelmed by this impending dread. I could not take back what I'd overheard in those woods, and his words to another woman haunted me. Somehow in my gut I knew that my husband was cheating on me. This revelation was like a huge electric lightning strike that struck me like a befuddling bombshell. I knew I needed to find answers and also confront this woman, whoever she was. Maybe she didn't even know my husband was married. I chose not to confront my husband about what I'd overheard. If I had done so, things could have gone horribly wrong. I didn't want to be the suspicious kind of wife, as you can imagine. The following morning, when my husband was flying back to Brazil, I joined my father in the watchtower that overlooked the pretty creek. He appeared to be very excited about an unusual bird he had just spotted perched on the willow tree, and he was pointing at it to me with his hand shaking in excitement. "That is a Saroyan warbrier," he said. "Listen, can you hear that buzzing sound it's making?" My father handed me the binoculars, and I watched the sweet little bird singing. "Dad, I need to tell you something," I said. "Go on, dear," he said. "I'm all ears." I proceeded to tell him all about my husband's strange phone call and how he'd told someone in Portuguese, "I love you, baby." "Am I just being paranoid, Dad?" I asked. "Could I be barking up the wrong tree? Could I have misunderstood him?" My father looked at me intently for a moment, his stern blue eyes fixed on me. "It's all very odd," he said. "I've never told another woman I love them apart from you and your mother. It would seem Pedro is hiding something." My father took me into his arms and assured me he would sort everything out. "It's all going to be all right," he told me, wiping away the tears that were pouring down my cheeks. "I don't want you getting upset until you know what's going on. I'll get a private investigator onto the job as soon as possible," he said, "and keep you posted. I'll get him to follow Pedro in Brazil to find out what he gets up to when your back is turned." "Thanks, Dad," I said. Not once did my father turn around and say, "I told you so, you married a rotter," which I can assure you my mother would have done. "It's all going to be all right, whatever happens," he assured me, kissing me on the forehead. That day I remember being in such a frantic state because I was so terrified about what the private detective would finally uncover. Was my husband having a steamy affair with an attractive Brazilian air hostess? This horrendous thought gnawed away at my stomach like a dog on a bone. I knew I needed to calm down and relax. These dismaying thoughts were really affecting me, and the one thing that calmed me was to take a long brisk walk in the woods, and so that is invariably what I did. I will never forget that day as long as I live, because it was the strangest, most peculiar day of my entire life, a day that will be seared on my life like a tattoo that cannot be faded. As I entered the woods that towered with all kinds of magnificent trees, from slippery elms, sycamores, and eastern white pines, I found myself immediately relaxing and appreciating the breathtaking beauty of the scenery that I was observing, and I was enjoying it all. I remember telling myself that whatever I was to learn about my husband Pedro, good or bad, how could I ever be sad, surrounded by such marvellous beauty, and living in such a spectacular part of the world? If it transpired that my husband was indeed cheating on me, well, I would worry about all that later. But now I would concentrate on living and enjoying every single second and moment of my life. Besides, it was such a useful, wasteless endeavour, allowing myself to get beat up about something that was totally out of my control. I was kicking the leaf litter on the forest floor in very deep contemplation, in what I can only describe as a meditative state of mind, when I suddenly realised that I was being watched by very curious, interested eyes that had been observing me for quite a while. It was as if I was being read like a book. That is the only way I can describe it to you. I glanced up to find myself standing yards away from the most extraordinary, imposing life form that I've ever seen in my entire life. Never in my wildest dreams would I have ever imagined getting close and personal to such a wild creature like this. I knew at once that this majestic, lofty beast was, in fact, a Bigfoot, and I also sensed that she wanted me to see her, as she made no attempt to scurry away or hide herself from me. The creature, or the Bigfoot, should I say, was standing on 2 feet, and was covered in long flowing auburn hair that gleamed in the sunlight. She was so clearly female, as she had small, pert, hairy breasts, and a very definite female energy about her that appeared almost maternal and protective. It was a loving, all-embracing kind of energy that was so palpable that I could actually feel it. I would say that she was about 7 foot tall and 600 pounds, with a girth of about 4 feet across. I did notice that she had very athletic, powerful, agile body that was literally ripped with muscle, and her shoulders were particularly large, as were her human-like feet and hands. Her head was a very distinctive bullet-like shape, and it did not notice much of a neck, as it did appear that her head literally blended in seamlessly to her shoulders. This female Bigfoot had a long, angular face, with a very distinctive brow ridge, a pinkish-brown leathery skin, deep-set rusty brown eyes, and a very slender mouth. I stood there transfixed by this magnificent creature, almost wondering if I'd entered an alternative reality, because quite simply I couldn't believe what I was actually seeing. I think I can safely say that we were both equally as intrigued about each other. I sensed that I was as fascinated about her as she was as fascinated about me, and the energy between us was definitely electric, because we just connected. I really sensed this creature was reaching out to me amidst the chaos and upheaval in my life, almost as if she was trying to reassure me in the very same way my father had done earlier in the morning. I sensed she was saying it was all going to be all right, however it turns out. The creature was only standing yards away from me. If I had reached out to her, I could have actually touched her. I just remember looking into those warm brown eyes, and although the creature's lips did not move, I sensed her eyes were smiling at me. I do not know how long we stood gazing at each other, but it felt like a lifetime, almost like I was in an art gallery and observing every detail of a painting that I just loved, and was trying to comprehend and absorb what the message the painting was trying to convey. The creature finally just squatted under the tree and proceeded to draw something on the ground. She drew 3 cone-shaped heads in varying sizes and pointed to the second one, which she indicated was herself. I realized she was telling me that she had a male companion and a little one. I drew myself and indicated to me, and then I drew my husband. I then put a cross through his head as a way of saying, "I'm not sure about him anymore." I don't know whether she understood what I was trying to say or not, but even if she didn't, it was good to express my grief to a stranger. It felt incredibly therapeutic and very healing. She then got up onto her agile legs and pointed to the 2 cone heads she had drawn, and I knew she was saying that she needed to get back to them. Suddenly she handed me a little stone, and to my amazement it was a rose quartz. "Where did you get this?" I asked, looking amazed. But she looked at me one more time, and then she was gone, as she took a few more strides on her long legs, and then disappeared into the woods. She moved with such flawless grace. As I studied the pretty rugged pink quartz stone that she had given me, 2 thoughts came into my mind. Was this a chance encounter, I wondered, or was this divinely orchestrated? Coming from a Catholic family, we do believe in the miraculous and in glimpses of the divine in our natural world. I knew that the rose quartz was the stone of unconditional love, strength, healing, and peace. What an extraordinary stone to give me at such a tumultuous time in my life, I thought. I clutched the stone tightly and returned home to the cottage, feeling so uplifted and strengthened by my encounter with such a majestic Bigfoot creature. Several days passed with no word from my father about the private investigator, and I was living on tender hooks. It was difficult living with Pedro when he was in West Virginia with me and not in Brazil. But I'm glad to tell you I remained strong and gave him no reason to suspect that I had any doubts about our relationship. I remember it was on a Tuesday morning when my father arrived at my home with a huge brown paper envelope in his hand. "I think you're going to need to sit down before you look at this," he said to me. "What are they?" I asked him. "Photographs," he said. I opened the photographs and saw a picture of Pedro with a blonde woman and 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls to be exact, in varying ages, all smiling in the camera. "Who are these people?" I asked my father. "That's Pedro's wife and his 4 children," said my father gravely. "He was married to her 8 years before he even met you, and they live in São Paulo in Brazil." "You've got to be kidding," I said, examining the photographs with utter horror. "It gets worse," said my father, presenting me with another photograph of an older man and an older woman surrounded by 8 children. One in the picture I could see was clearly Pedro, but all the other people in the photograph looked like they were related to him. "Who are these people?" I asked my dad. "That's Pedro's family. His mother and his father are both very much alive, and they were never killed in that fatal car accident he told you about. He has 3 brothers and 4 sisters who are also very much alive, and they lived in São Paulo in Brazil." I looked at my father in absolute horror. "Dad," I said, "I've been living a total lie." My father proceeded to show me yet another picture of a young woman. "Who is this?" he said. "Her name is Julia, and she's pregnant with Pedro's baby, which is expected in June, and she also lives in Brazil, and is now engaged to Pedro." "You are kidding, Dad," I said. "You are kidding." "Sorry, sweetheart," he said, "I'm not." So that's my story. Fast forward a whole year and my marriage to Pedro was annulled, and even though his wife found out about his misbehaviour, she chose to forgive him. Pedro escaped a prison term but received a hectic fine which his devoted parents chose to pay on his behalf. The young pregnant girlfriend was informed about Pedro's impropriety and chose to sever ties with him, and is currently raising his child as a single mother.
I do not regret anything that happened with Pedro because I'm a stronger, wiser and more compassionate person as a result. And it's attributes that I really believe I gained from this harrowing experience. I still have that pink quartz stone that Bigfoot gave me, and I believe my encounter with her was divinely orchestrated, because meeting her gave me the strength to pull through this challenging time. I believe I was meant to meet her. I've not seen her on my land again, but I still live in my pretty home in West Virginia, and I'm now married to a wonderful man and have never been happier. My message to everyone out there is to never give up, to never, ever give up, no matter how tough it gets, because believe me, it gets better. It invariably always does. And no matter what happens to you in your life, no matter how hard it is, things always get better. And darkness turns to light. Heaviness turns to light. It always gets better.
Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the Omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my Omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.